23rd at 8:30 a.m. at the East Mezzanine of City Hall, 72 West College Avenue, San Angelo, Texas, for the purpose of considering the following agenda items. It's 8:30. We'll call this meeting to order. Good morning. Number 2, prayer. Director Barrio, if you could lead us in prayer this morning.
I surely will. If I could get my microphone on. There we go. If you would bow with me. Heavenly Father, we thank you for the opportunity to live in this fine city of San Angelo, Texas. We pray that every one of our contributions to this city will be worthy of your praise. But more importantly, we praise you, God, for all that you created and all that you give to us with which to work. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you. Number 3, public comment. Issues or items that are not on the agenda may be raised by the public at this time. Citizens should speak from the podium, begin by stating their name, and limit remarks to less than 3 minutes. Board members may request that a discussed item be placed on a future agenda. The board takes public comment on all regular agenda items during the discussion of those items. Do we have any public comment?
Good morning, Board.
Good morning.
My name is Dave Erickson, Director of the ASU Small Business Development Center, and I want to introduce someone here today to you. As you know, we have a professional staff of business advisors at the SBDC that work with small business clients, and we also have a student team, an ASU student team, which consists of graduate assistants in the MBA program primarily at ASU. I'd like to introduce Jennifer Perez, who is our newest graduate assistant. As you know, they graduate and they have to leave, so we're always hiring new ones. And we had a few graduate that you had met earlier. And I want to introduce Jennifer. She's an MBA student at ASU. And Jennifer, would you like to say a few words to the group?
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Perez, and I am a new graduate assistant at ASU Small Business Development Center. I graduated last year with my bachelor's, but decided to continue my education. So now I'm back at ASU studying for my master's in business administration. I was born and raised here in San Angelo, so I'm very grateful to be part of an organization that gives back to the community and contributes to the economic development. I'm very thankful and blessed to be in this position. I'm so eager to learn, and thank you for letting me be here today.
Awesome. Well, welcome aboard.
As you know, the graduate assistants provide great behind-the-scenes work for us at the SBDC, working on behalf of clients and other programs and events and things like that. So it's tremendous service learning opportunities for them, besides the great service that, as Jennifer mentioned, give to us and to the city of San Angelo. So thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Do we have any additional public comment?
Yes. Mr. President, we have someone here with us today from City Attorney's Office. I just want to welcome Holly Voth, who is ringing in for Brandon Dyson this morning.
Okay. Good morning. Welcome. Okay. And then I'll take a minute, just a public comment, to welcome and introduce our new board members. So to my right, we have over here Director John Spano. Welcome.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Okay. And then over here, we have Director Ruben Ceballos. Welcome.
Good morning. Thank you.
All right. Moving on to number 4, recognition. A, recognition of Edward Carrasco and Bill Dendel for the dedicated service to the City of San Angelo Development Corporation, Board of Directors, presentation by Guy Andrews.
Well, we're saying adios and vaya con Dios to 2 of our real veterans that have served on this board for a long time and have just been superlative members, always available, great attendance at these meetings, great counselors, and so you will be missed, but we wanted to recognize your service. We have a plaque for each of you, Mr. Carrasco, Mr. Dendel, and give you an opportunity to say a few words, if you like.
I'd like to thank everyone for allowing us to serve. I mean, it's a true pleasure and honor to be able to serve on the board. Welcome to new board members. Y'all will truly embrace it. Takes a little learning curve to get things going, but it's an exciting journey. You have a great staff. Guy, Nolan, Nora, Bob. I mean, it's a true well-oiled machine, and great council members. I'd like to thank Tommy for allowing me the opportunity to have served on the board. Looking back since 2015, so I've been on here quite some time. But thank you. I'll turn it over to Bill.
Edward stole most of my comments. But President Cueto, members of the board, thank you very much for your service to San Angelo. It's been a privilege to serve with you guys, and welcome to the two new members. Talk to these guys. They can help you get on board within a couple of months, and you'll be going. There's a lot of things that happened in San Angelo over the last few years. It's been a privilege to be a part of that. Good to see Guy come on board probably 2018 or somewhere there within my term, last few terms. And it's been great to work with this staff, Guy and Nora and Nolan and Bob. Again, as Edward said, a hardworking staff and a hardworking board too. So thank you very much for that privilege to serve during these last 4.5 years for me.
We'll take a picture here and then.
Okay. Invite Angelo, son.
Right.
It's hasta la vista.
Baby. Good show, man.
Vaya con Dios.
All right. We'll move on to the number 5, the consent agenda. A, consider approving the necessary corporation disbursements. B, consider approving the February 23rd, 2022 meeting minutes. C, consider approving the February 2022 financial statements. And D, consider authorizing the city internal auditor to continue a compliance audit of the professional services performance agreement by and between the City of San Angelo Development Corporation and the San Angelo Chamber of Commerce. Do we have a motion?
Yeah, I'll make a motion that we approve consent agenda items A through D.
Okay, we have first Director
And I'll
Priest
second that.
and a second by Director Barrio. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you. Moving on to number 6, the regular agenda. A, consider authorizing the use of sales and use tax funds for the 2022 business plan competition in the amount of $80,000 as authorized under Texas Local Government Code, Chapter 505, and in conjunction with this approval, approving an advertising services agreement by and between the City of San Angelo Development Corporation and McLaughlin Advertising in the amount of $5,000 for marketing and promotion of the 2022 business plan competition, and authorizing the board president or their designee to negotiate and execute all necessary documents. Presentation by Nora Navarez, Economic Development Assistant. Good morning.
Good morning, Board. Yes, so we are preparing for the next business plan competition 2022. It'll be our 7th one. So just a quick rundown as to how the allocated funds of the $80,000 are used for our viewers. McLaughlin Advertising, they do a wonderful job in marketing our competition, which the cost of that is $5,000. The competition award is $70,000, and the expense of $5,000. And along with, also, I have been working with our public information folks, Brian and Lorelei, and they have also been doing some videos so that we can also use for marketing as well, and they're wonderful. So if you've not seen them, they're on YouTube. They're great. We are proposing to do the kickoff in May. The competition is conducted in 3 phases. Phase 1, the entry form and the business overview. Phase 2 is the draft business plan. And then Phase 3, which is the final business plan and presentation to the judges. The announcement of the winner will be November 2022, I'm sorry. If you have any other questions for me, I'll be happy to answer them, but
Okay. Any questions? No? Okay, do we have a motion? We need a motion?
So moved.
Okay, we have a first by Director Evitt.
I'll second.
All right, and a second by Director Freeze. Any discussion? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Nora.
thank you.
What? Oh, we need public comment? Oh, sorry, okay. Any public comment on that? All right. It's 8:40, 8:41. Seeing no, we'll close it for public comment. Do we need to do the motion again? Okay, we'll do the motion again, so
So moved.
okay,
And I'll second.
okay. So first, Director Abbott, second, Director Freeze. Any discussion? No? All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Okay, motion carries. Thank you. All right. Moving on to 6B. Reconsideration and possible action regarding the second prize award for the 2021 business plan competition to Lone Star Cheeseburger and authorizing the board president to execute all necessary documents. Presentation by Nolan Sosa, Economic Development Administrator.
Good morning, Board. Nolan Sosa, Economic Development Administrator. The item before you this morning is related to our 2021 business plan competition. On November 13th, 2021, an independent judging panel selected our first, second, and third prize business plan competition winners. Lone Star Cheeseburger Company won second place in the competition and is eligible to receive up to $20,000 in prize monies along with in-kind prizes. On December 15th, 2021, this board approved awarding the prize agreements, and our City Council ratified this action on January 4th, 2022. Council authorized our board president to execute all necessary documents in conjunction with that award. Following council approval, staff began working with each winner to execute their prize agreements. Both our first and third prize winners have already executed their standard prize agreements. Lone Star Cheeseburger Company sought legal representation to negotiate the terms of their prize agreement, so we directed our corporate legal counsel, Brandon Dyson, to represent the Economic Development Corporation in these negotiations. Lone Star requested several revisions to our standard prize agreement. Most notably, they declined to report on gross sales. They declined to verify that they've paid all business, personal, and real property taxes, and they've requested to reduce the performance term of the agreement from 3 years to 1 year. Lone Star plans to use the prize monies for tuition reimbursement for culinary education. Lone Star provided program guidelines that state that they will, quote, pay the approved amount of tuition reimbursement in 6 equal payments over 18 months. Therefore, a 1-year term is not workable. Lone Star's proposals depart substantially from our standard prize agreement. Staff, through our corporate counsel, have negotiated as far as we're comfortable negotiating without board's input. At this time, we are seeking direction from our board on how you would like us to proceed with these negotiations. I'm happy to answer any questions and provide information that might help your discussion.
Do you have any questions from the board?
Yes, Nolan, have we ever before deviated from the standard terms?
No, sir, we have not.
Over the years, how many awards have been granted?
Well, we're going into year 7, and I think Nora would have to correct me, but we've done 14 of these agreements, 14?
That is correct.
14?
Yes, 14.
Why then do we engage in negotiations this time?
In this instance, Lone Star Cheeseburger Company proposed something substantially different than what we've seen in years past. A couple of examples are like Old Central Firehouse Pizza, for example. They bought a pizza oven. That was a one-time capital investment. Longhorn Coffee Company, they bought a Keurig cup machine, one-time capital investment. So we kind of have a standard form of an agreement that we use for the competition. Lone Star Cheeseburger proposed a program, a tuition reimbursement program, so that departs from what we've seen in years past. So we negotiated with Lone Star because this is a different proposal than we've seen before. So we wanted to make every effort that we could to work with the applicant.
Okay.
Any other questions from the board?
I do have one more, maybe more as we talk. What were the results of the negotiation?
We have come to agreement on certain concessions. Like I mentioned, they declined to provide gross sales. We've, agreed that that's something that could be removed. We are holding to the 3-year term because it is an 18-month program, so we would need to ensure that whoever started the program actually completes the program. And Lone Star offered some provisions, kind of a 3-page program guideline document that's in front of you actually all. And there's language in there that we're not quite comfortable with. We could offer revisions, but we seek the board's direction on whether we want to agree to this type of regime or if, we want to do something as far as reconsidering the award. Because again, as I've mentioned, this is substantially different than what we've seen with other applicants. Typically, it's just a one-time expenditure, and then they report on the out years to ensure that they're still retaining their jobs, they're maintaining their payrolls, they're paying current on their taxes. And that's, one of the things that they've said they don't want to provide is proof of the business, real property taxes. That's imperative in this situation because, as you know, this agreement is taxpayer funded. So we want to ensure that whoever benefits from taxpayer dollars, including the sales and use tax, is paid and current on their taxes. And we rely on the information provided by the entrant to show that they've paid their taxes. It is not incumbent on the city or the development corporation to go to the appraisal district to find this information. We rely on the submission of the person reporting to us, whether they paid their taxes or not.
And these duties were put forth at the beginning of the competition entry, not something we've presented after the fact. Is that correct?
That's correct. So at the beginning of the competition, they are presented, usually they will meet with a business advisor in the ASU Small Business Development Center. Now, that's optional at the beginning stage of the competition. However, in order to enter the competition, they represent and warrant that they have reviewed and agree to abide by the competition guidelines.
Two things that concern me here is that we don't change the rules in the middle of the game. And the other thing that comes to mind is that these are the public funds, as you mentioned. And the reporting is to assure that the public funds produce results that were expected from the very intent of the competition. I'd like to make a motion, but if the board has any other questions, I yield to that first.
Well, obviously seeing Mr. Condon in the audience, I'm assuming he's going to have some remarks that are prepared. So I'd personally like to, if it's appropriate or allowed, to... Oh, we need a motion first? Okay, I wanted to...
But
Okay.
in the absence of any other board questions, I'll go ahead and make the motion that we cease negotiations and rescind the award with consideration that the award monies from the 2021 business plan competition either be reserved to be applied to this year's or future plan competitions. I think we'll have to adjust the budget and appropriations in that, but as part of a follow-up, I think we do need to consider what happens to those funds. Since that is not on the agenda, I feel uncomfortable actually including that as part of the motion. So my motion at this point would be to cease the negotiations and to rescind that award.
Okay. So we have a motion on the floor, Director Barrio. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
We have a second by Director Freeze. So at this time, we'll open it up to public comment. It's 8:49.
My name is Sarah Giddings, and I am the attorney for Lone Star Cheeseburger, and I have been directly involved in these negotiations. on behalf of Mr. Condon. And I just want to point out a couple things in discussing this. The first is under the San Angelo Business Plan Competition Guidelines. One of the specific things it says is that the cash grants will be distributed in accordance with the terms of grant agreements negotiated with the winners. Now, if other past recipients have chosen not to negotiate such grant agreements, that should not prevent my client from engaging in such negotiations. What has been conveyed to me is these are set terms. We haven't done this in the past. But nowhere are many of these terms laid out in either the guidelines to the business plan competition or in the Appendix 2 that the contestants sign, which is part of the entry form that contains some agreements, particularly things about disclosure of public information, which I actually had pointed out to them is much better in the Appendix 2 than in the agreement that they proposed. In the agreement proposed to us, there was no protection for confidential information, anything in that regards that would affect my client's right to defend himself. And so in negotiating these agreements and these terms, we came to it with the understanding that we had the ability to do this as set forth in the guidelines of the business plan competition. We are willing and have made certain concessions in regards to this. The tuition reimbursement program plan that's in front of you is the plan that is adopted both by Lone Star Cheeseburger and Angry Cactus in regards to their program. It is a standard tuition reimbursement program that I have used for other clients. It is approved by the IRS, which is why many of those terms are in there. As some of you may or may not be aware, the IRS does allow for tuition reimbursement programs and is a tax advantage as an incentive to continue to grow the workforce and to be able to provide, similar to health insurance, dental, it's one of the incentives that you can give to your employees. And so we've engaged in these negotiations in good faith, in wanting to continue with this competition. And we would like to continue to engage in those negotiations and to reach an agreement. We understand, the concerns that have been expressed, and we have been trying to work through those. I got married and went on a honeymoon and came back, and this meeting was set, and I came back yesterday. So, I'm kind of a little behind on the 8 ball. I didn't get to talk to Mr. Dyson last week, but that's, kind of where we're coming with our position. And Mr. Condon is here and is open to discussing any of this with you as well. But our concern is that there is a right to negotiate these agreements, and that was not given.
Okay. I appreciate that. Thank you. Any other public comment?
I'm Tim Condon, and I'm the owner of Lone Star Cheeseburger. I just kind of want to dumb it down a little bit and kind of express where I'm coming from. So we do have a initiative that we're working on where I have a culinary program that is located at Angry Cactus, and I use Lone Star Cheeseburger's employees as well as Angry Cactus's employees, and we pay for their culinary program as part of an incentive to educate but also retain employees. 100% of this money is going toward their culinary scholarships. I can get up to six employees educated with just the $20,000. And when I entered this competition, I'm a very detailed person. I read every single thing and I fully understood everything I signed. At no point in time did a 3-year contract come up in any of the documents that I signed. Secondly, at no point in time did any of these 14 pages of documents that I was presented just in February, for the first time, by the way, did any of the proprietary information come up. They want me to report my sales, my costs, basically my profit and loss statement. Now, we've negotiated that out at this current time. My big thing is I'm willing to segregate these funds, put them in a separate account. It's going directly for this cause. By adding additional work like reporting my 941s every quarter for the next 3 years and doing all this additional information, giving all this additional information, I'm the guy that's like working the grill when people call in sick. I'm the guy who's working the dish pit when somebody calls in sick. I'm trying to make my life more efficient, more easy. By adding additional work and additional reports that need to go here or there, I try to stay away from stuff like that. I do an audit once a year. I'm willing to give the finances once a year. We've negotiated up to this point. It's just a very simple thing. I wasn't presented with all of this baggage at any point in time before I won this competition, or got second place in this competition. So just to dumb it down, like I said, this was all presented to me after the fact. I didn't know that there was this 14-page document that I had to sign in order to get the monies. I did read very fully and in detail the documents that I did sign, and there was none of this in there. And it's all trackable because 100% of this was done electronically through email correspondence directly with the city. And there's never been a time where that was included in any of the paperwork. And so that's what we're trying to negotiate out, is just all the additional reporting, all the additional things. I know where the money's going. I know why economic development wants to see those numbers. I fully get it, but my cause is to have this money go directly toward these students and toward education in general. So any questions?
Yeah, I'll ask a question. So these reports, it's my understanding, just trying to understand the process, that the forms that are being requested, documents and so forth, are not, or shouldn't be, in my interpretation, any additional stuff that you wouldn't have to do normally for reporting, to your taxes at the end of the year anyways. Is that the case?
No, well, so the 941s, I can give those. That's easy. I'm not creating a document we've already talked about. I'll give you guys my 941s. That's fine. I just don't want to have to give it 4 times a year for the next 3 years. Let me do it 1 year and I'll give you all 4. Or whatever we can negotiate, as far as just to make it as simple as possible. I'm fighting for this money because I can see 6 people's educations being paid for. That's what I'm here for. This money isn't for me. This money is for my employees and for my workforce, to educate them in culinary arts. I was just sidetracked by the fact that there's a 14-page document that was handed to me almost a month and a half after I got the big fancy check and took my pictures. And by the way, I've gone to Rotary Club and all these other obligations as part of this, as part of the original document. I'm going to speak about these funds, and I'm going to talk when Dave calls me up. We go to all these different meetings and talk about this competition. So I've done my part. I'm just wanting to, put that money in the education fund and in a bank account, so.
If I may, on the documentation, on the reporting, it's actually not quarterly. Yes, you do report your work, 41, your form is quarterly, but the report that I give the winners is biannually. So they already at that point, or they already have 2 quarters, so they can just submit that information. The reporting requirements, like I said, is done biannually.
Would it be appropriate, just out of curiosity, I don't know if it's appropriate or not, like you said that several concessions have been made, I guess, on both sides. So what exactly, if that's allowed to be spoken to about, what are we, what are we missing? Like what's the disconnect?
Yeah, I can hand that off to Sarah. Go ahead.
I do want to clarify for the record, just for a moment,
Yes, sir.
that when that people entering the competition sign an entry form, the Public Information Act disclosure statement is in that entry form. So I just wanted to clarify that for the record, that is on the form when they enter the competition.
Correct, and that's, it's actually written better in the Appendix 2 than in the proposed agreement, and that was something that we agreed that we were going to replace that language as it was written in Appendix 2 into what was proposed, because it was not, did not have the language allowing the, to notify about a public information request and protection. So, but that is something that was already agreed to.
And before we dig in, we won't negotiate the terms of an agreement in an open session of a board meeting. We have a motion on the table and a second, so I think we need to take up consideration of that motion before we move forward with any further discussion.
That's appropriate. Okay. Any questions from the board?
I believe I need to abstain from this vote. I have a conflict.
Okay. Okay. Any other questions or comments by the board?
I just have a quick question. Obviously, it's my first day, right? So I don't feel comfortable making the decision either way. From me, I don't have enough information on both sides of this. So are we under any type of time crunch that I'm not aware of right now, to where we can't just get a little bit of time, just speaking for myself, to get a better understanding of how we got to where we are today, other than hashing it out quickly, right? We already have a motion on the floor to kill it, which makes me uncomfortable, right? Because I don't know all the facts. I haven't heard, just briefly, somewhat of both sides. So I would personally like a little bit more time before I can make the best decision that I can make for me and my conscience, right? I certainly wouldn't vote to kill this thing today, but at the same time, I couldn't vote to move this thing forward today either, right? So I'm respectfully asking, is there any way we can just get a little bit more time, at least for me, to understand exactly what's going on and do my due diligence? This is the first I'm hearing of it, right? So.
Well, I would say according to Robert's rules, we have a motion on the table. So if we're not comfortable with that, then we'd have to, either approve or not approve that motion. And then we could submit a new motion at that point.
Correct, that's the request. My request would be, I would like for this motion to be killed, and let's see if we could come up with, I would certainly make a motion that, if it's possible, again, and that's why I'm asking if there's a time frame that I'm unaware of. I mean, I came over from planning, right? So every time we killed the motion, it basically, it held up things, right? And we always tried to move things forward. And so if there's a time frame that I don't know about, then I would like to, but I would respectfully request that, I believe it was John, that you would rethink your motion, but.
Well, we could, it's on the floor already. I mean, he could either rescind it or we could just vote on it, which is the next step after this discussion. So, but I appreciate the feedback. Anyone else? Okay.
No, I mean, I would echo the comments. The only thing I would add is, having served previously in public sector roles where we negotiated with industry, there are challenges to navigate. Industry always wants to operate in the way industry does, but public funds are usually tied to different restrictions. So I can see the challenges on both sides, but without having seen everything before, it would be difficult to make a decision. I did have a question though. Well, I guess it won't matter because this is, that's not. Well, just on point number 6, you talk about tuition reimbursement at 50% or at a maximum of 100%. It says the amount of reimbursement will be determined by Lone Star Cheeseburger Company based on the current profitability of the business. I would assume that you'd have to change that language for this because these funds would already be guaranteed, right? It wouldn't matter, at least for this particular funds. So that's just something that I noted.
Okay. All right. Well, if there's no other questions or comments, then we'll take a vote on the motion on the floor. So all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed say aye or nay. I'll say nay. So are we at are you all withholding from voting, or so it's one to one?
Correct. I will not. I'm not voting. So you have a 1-to-1.
Actually, I believe the COSA DC bylaws say if a board member does not vote and has not for reason abstained, then it is considered an aye vote. It has to be an active nay.
Okay.
So you're saying you can't you can't abstain for lack of information? I think Robert's rule. I think Robert's rules would speak differently than that.
If you don't agree with the motion, you can vote nay. If you do agree with the motion, you vote aye. Abstaining for the sake of a conflict of interest, it's as though one board member is simply not in attendance.
Okay.
So we're not allowed to abstain, is what we're saying?
No, without having.
It's an up or down vote of
Okay.
board members participating.
So in order to introduce a new motion or to continue per se negotiations or anything else,
Can you repeat your motion?
Yes, a motion to cease the negotiations and to rescind the award. with a reservation that we'll reconsider what to do with the $20,000 at a later time.
Okay, so that doesn't mean that that they lose the award?
Yes.
It does mean that, okay. Well, I would vote nay. I'd like to maybe rephrase that motion.
Okay, well, we have the motion on the table, so we'll just need to vote on the
So
current
nay.
motion.
So nay.
All right, so we'll repeat the vote, just for clarity. So all those in favor, say aye.
Aye.
So we have 2. All those opposed, say nay.
Nay.
Nay. So that's 3.
Very good.
So the motion does not pass. And at this point, we could entertain a new motion and decide how we want to proceed. And so I guess, Director Spano, to your point, if your motion, as I understood it based on your comments, is to
If we are going to discuss terms of a contract, we would need to move that into executive session.
Yep.
Closed
So
session.
we'll need a motion and a second and a vote of the board to move into executive.
okay.
Will that be able to be done in today's executive session?
It would be your choice. Staff recommendation would be to have it in next session. Well, no, we probably ought to go ahead and have it in executive session today. Get this thing done.
That will delay negotiations a month
Yeah, so
until our
let's-
next meeting. And out of respect for Mr. Condon's time, he showed up here today, I think we'll move into executive, have a discussion with the board, and we can move out and try to take some action on this.
I think that's actually incorrect. Since it's not on the agenda as
How
an
do you-
executive session,
How do you just add it to an executive session?
That'd be for next month.
it would have to be for next month.
that says that any item, the board can vote any item.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you. What was that?
I believe we have a statement on the bottom of the agenda that says that the board can pull any item that's on the agenda to discussion in executive session.
Well, and I anticipated this might come up, so I discussed it with Brandon before we got here, and he said it's not able to go into executive session since it's not on the agenda. That's been my understanding, at least.
Well, okay.
That's how I understand the state of Texas, is you cannot do that.
Well, yeah.
Max?
Yes, sir.
If you would read the paragraph at the bottom of the agenda.
There is, an item at the bottom says, all contracts, agreements may be subject to further negotiation prior to execution. The board reserves the right to consider business out of posted order and/or meet in a closed session on any agenda item should the need arise, and if applicable, pursuant to authorization by Title V, Chapter 551 of the Texas Government Code.
We do.
Well, then, all that being said, can we entertain a motion, throwing it out there, to re-engage in negotiations and see if we're so close that we could reach an agreement? Because I think meeting as a board, if they're not, I'd want to hear their side, and so if we're going to meet as a board privately, and we could discuss next steps, and we should obviously do due diligence, but I would say that it would be unfair to not have them present and able to say, kind of hear their side as well, or to possibly continue negotiations where they've stalled and see if we could maybe reach an agreement by next month's meeting.
Yeah, this is a board decision on how you want to proceed, so you can make whatever motion you want to.
All right, well, I normally as president don't make motions. Am I allowed to make a motion? Okay. Well, then I'll move to continue negotiations and see if we can reach an agreement before our next meeting. If we're so close and both parties have made concessions, being a small business owner myself, I'm pro-business. Obviously, those, funds were earned as far as, the work that was put into it. I would hate to see those funds not be utilized. Obviously, it's good for business, and if we could figure out a way to make it work for all parties, I think that's what we're here for. So that'd be my motion to extend negotiations and try to reach an agreement before our next meeting.
And would you want to do that outside of the meeting? In other words, staff?
Oh, no, if there was, however, the negotiations, we had legal representation, right, on our side. They obviously legal representation on their side, so continue that. I'd be happy to participate in that as well, if
But other than at the meeting?
At a future, not right now, between now and the next meeting.
I might point out that those negotiations are actually between legal staffs.
Okay.
Still legal staffs, and that's where it stands now. So what you would be directing is that those negotiations continue between the legal staffs for Mr. Condon and for the city.
I would say so, if both parties are, in good faith negotiating, and if we're made progress, then I would say so. And if not, then I guess we could consider other avenues if needed, if we're unable to. I would say that before rescinding the order.
Right now, the only way it can continue, because it became a legal issue once Mr. Condon engaged an attorney.
Okay.
And so it's handled by the legal staffs until they can come to a resolution on it. So what you would be directing is that the legal staff continue to do that, to negotiate.
Yes.
If that's the desire of the board.
Yes, and in good faith and with a timeline of having this resolved by our next meeting. So putting a deadline to it instead of just, going on forever, because we're about to kick off a new competition. We kind of want to get this done, I would say, before that kicks off.
Okay. So you need to make a motion.
So I have the motion. I guess we need a second.
I'll second it.
Okay. So we have,
And for clarification, just for legal staff, since the negotiations up to this point, it kind of reached a standstill. I think that's one of the reasons we met today, is to give us direction in our negotiations. For example, the term from 3 years to 1 year, is that something you all would advise legal even negotiating on, or is that kind of a non-negotiable item?
well, I think what Mr. Andrews said is we're not really allowed to speak about the terms, I guess, at this point. Right. So I would say, again, I'm in sales and I negotiate, and I like to look at all of them and then kind of pick them apart. So answer yes or no to that one question without knowing what the other things are.
If I could interrupt, please, I think it'd be adverse to the corporation interests to negotiate this in open session.
Absolutely.
So,
And
I
I will
would say that's a question we need to answer in executive session or not in open session.
Right.
As we are negotiating a contract with, our interests should be held confidential until they're expressed in a written draft contract.
I would agree. Perfect. Say that much more eloquently than I could. Thank you. Yeah. Okay. So we have a first, we have a second. Any public comment? So any public comment at this time?
I will just note, without moving into executive session and conferring with legal counsel to give them direction on the board's position regarding certain terms, we will operate in the interim between now and the next meeting without guidance or direction from the board on what terms we can concede on and which we cannot. So I would urge the board to move into a brief executive session so that our legal counsel can get direction on what this board is willing to accept and what we are not willing to accept.
We need to vote.
Public question, if that's okay. I'm okay with you guys going into executive and doing what I just want to make sure that I have representation in that meeting if that's legally possible. I don't know how that works.
You may not. That is the corporation's time to confer with their legal counsel, and it is not open to the public.
Yeah, however, any decision coming out of that would be brought to the next meeting.
And I might just add as well that we're like literally just down to maybe the last one or two things and in the contract, and we haven't actually had a formal red line sent back to us. So it's not that these negotiations have stalled. We just don't really know what the official position is. The original red line is not current that we've gotten. So we're just waiting for a red line so we can rebut the last two things that we have, and then I'd like to move forward. I'm not trying to extend this out. I didn't even realize that this was going to be such a big problem. So I'm wanting to simplify this thing and just get it done and over with, for both of our both of our interests. So, we're just waiting for a final red line so that we can have know exactly what we've agreed to. A lot of different things through email formats, exchanges between the city attorney's office and Sarah. So we're just waiting for the final document, and we can sign it as long as we get the last one or two things figured out. So it's a lot closer than it's being portrayed. We're almost there. Negotiations have not stalled. It's just a matter of where's the documentation so I can sign. I need to read some sort of red line that shows exactly where we're at, and we haven't received that yet. So that's kind of where the stalling is happening, not on our end.
And again, I'm very hesitant to allow an executive session today. Mr. Dyson was very clear that that would not be allowed today. So I don't want anything to happen that would be invalid later.
Right. Okay. Well, we still have a motion to allow both parties that have been involved in the negotiations to continue that negotiations. And I think to Nolan's point, they're asking for direction, but I think if y'all are so close, you've negotiated so far without us, we're gonna review whatever you agree to if we could reach an agreement. I'm comfortable with the motion that's on the floor. Might be biased because I'm the one that said it, but to continue the negotiations and in good faith to have a response to us for the next meeting. So if that's still legal and all right, then I'd like to call the vote on that motion.
I have one other comment. Considering what we've been advised by legal as well as staff, that without communication, clear communication from the board, legal will have no direction from us if we proceed in that manner. And I will foretell that I will vote nay on this motion because we need to communicate with our legal staff what direction they need.
And my only comment to that would be then, we'd be kicking this can down the road for next month to have an executive, then maybe action subsequently after that. So we're looking at 2 months down the road, possibly to hopefully have some kind of resolution when potentially we could have this resolved by the next meeting. So that would be my only opposition to that comment, although I do agree with you, Director Mario, in an effort to expedite this and, you know, parties have negotiated, seems like 90% of the way already. If they were completely two different, you know, ballparks, then I think we would have to do our due diligence and provide our counsel with direction. But I think if they're that close, it might be just, to Mr. Condon's point, getting a draft to him. If he's accepting, he might be able to sign it, and if not, maybe provide some changes.
I have a question. Are we allowed to amend it to put like a time frame, you know, like where we meet as an executive session within the next week or something, so that we don't have to wait until the next month? So that we could have this maybe deal closed by next month?
I'd like staff input on calling a special meeting.
Staff will certainly accommodate any request. President, 2 vice presidents, or, you know, at least 2 directors may call a special meeting at any time per our bylaws. So if that's, you know, the will of the board, we will certainly work our schedules to accommodate that.
Ms. Gaines, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I just, in regards to where we are in the negotiation, there's actually probably another concession that we're willing to make in regards to the term, to leave it 3, so really it goes down to really what reports need to be given, because I know the 3 years so that's really kind of what we're down to. But as Mr. Connor pointed out, I sent a red line showing the changes that we requested, and we haven't received anything back.
Pardon me, I think we're getting into contract terms right now.
I just, in the negotiations,
So
just to say that is, I know one of the things they wanted guidance on, so.
Okay. All right, thank you. So any other discussion, or are we ready for a vote, or are we waiting on legal? Okay. We'll pause, wait on legal.
So, just a question then. So are we, in your motion, will we add the requirement of having a special session called? Or we would do that separately?
That, yeah.
We would do that separately. So we would make the motion, consider the motion that's on the table, and then a director may make a motion for a special meeting, set a date, time, and location, and this board would take up that matter.
I would suggest right now to just, there's a legal conference going on, and let's wait to hear back from our attorney what she has to say.
Okay.
Mr. President, I think since we kind of have an audience at this point, just to allow everybody time to take a brief recess, maybe if they want to grab coffee or grab something to eat while we wait for the conference to conclude.
Yeah, appreciate it. Let's take a 10-minute recess. It's 9:21. We'll come back at 9:31. Hopefully, we'll have some information at that point. Thank you, everyone. It's 9:30. So after our recess, I will rescind my motion that's on the table right now, if that's allowed, and then we will go or follow section 551.071, consultations with attorney regarding the contract for line item 6B, reconsideration and possible action regarding the second prize award for the 2021 business plan competition to Lone Star Cheeseburger, and authorizing the board president to execute all necessary documents and move that into executive session. Under the provision of Government Code Title V, Open Government, Ethics Subtitle A, Open Government, Chapter 551, Open Meetings, Subchapter D, exceptions to require that meetings be open under the following sections, which is, I don't know if I read that in reverse order or not, but is that it?
Yeah, as long as it's read in, I think you're
Okay.
safe to go into executive session.
Okay. So I like Mr. Condon's words of dumbing it down a little bit. So we'll move this conversation into executive session immediately following this meeting, right? So that way we could discuss and give our legal representation guidance on how to move forward.
Would that be following this meeting or right now?
Would it be right now? Okay, then that'd be right now. Okay. Okay. So we'd be entering closed session right now, and it is 9:32. Welcome back, everybody. It is 10:04, and we are out of closed session. I think is there a motion coming out of closed session?
Yeah, before we make a motion, I'll just give a brief overview of what was discussed. We walked through the different revisions proposed by Lone Star Cheeseburger Company. We reviewed their tuition program as submitted to our legal counsel. We discussed various terms and provisions with the board, and based on what is presented and where negotiations currently stand, the staff recommendation is that we rescind the award, the prize award.
I will make the motion, very similar to what I did earlier. Motion to cease negotiations and rescind the award.
So we have a first by Director Barrio. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Second by Director Freeze. Do we open it to public comment again? Okay. Okay, so we'll open it up to public comment.
I was just kind of curious, is there a way, well, I mean, it hasn't been voted on or anything, so I'm just kind of curious why, or if there's, what is the issues, how do we get from 10 minutes or 20 minutes ago to now, that kind of questions. Especially when we're ready to finalize, negotiate, you know.
Right. We're not going to disclose the information that we share with our board in executive session because that is a conference between our board and their legal counsel.
Any other public comment?
I will provide just a small degree of additional transparency for Mr. Condon because he did come here today. In executive session, we did walk through the timeline, we walked through correspondence, we discussed the particulars of the negotiation and shared with our board all the information that you referenced that, you know, is available to the public. So I just wanted you to know that.
My motion stands.
Additional public comment?
Yeah, I guess, I mean, it's concerning that that was the recommendation, considering how close we were in reaching an agreement, and we're actually going to give additional concessions. So I guess in asking you guys is just understand that Mr. Condon and I have discussed that agreement in quite depth, and our understanding was there was mainly two issues. I won't specifically go into those because we're in open session, but that it was something that some of the main sticking points that we were going to concede on those and be willing to work. This award is really important to Mr. Condon to start this culinary program that I think ultimately goes to the point of the competition, or one of the things, which is job retention. And this program with it has an incentive to maintain employees that work and expand their culinary education. And so in entertaining this motion, I guess I would request that and know that we are and wanted to continue these negotiations and understanding the concern that you guys had. And so that's really what I'd like to add.
Okay, thank you. Okay. If there's any other public comment, we'll close it for public comment. It is 10:08. Any discussion, feedback from the board? No? So all those in favor say aye.
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 Okay, that was, we can show hands just to be clear. Okay, 4 ayes, all those opposed, I'll say nay. So the motion passes 4-1. Okay, moving on to number 8, follow-up and administrative issues. A, consideration and possible actions of items discussed in closed session if needed. And B, consideration, announcements and consideration of future agenda items. Do we have any of those? Seeing none, the next is the workshop, but we'll take a brief recess in order to prepare for the workshop. So it's 10:09. We'll do a 10-minute recess till, let's just say 10:20 to round it up before we start our workshop agenda. Thank you, everybody. We'll get this show on the road. It is 10:21. We'll move on to action agenda item 9, workshop agenda, and we'll jump right in with A, board member orientation, presentation by Nolan Sosa.
Okay, good morning, board. Nolan Sosa, Economic Development Administrator. I want to kick off our workshop this morning with just a brief overview of economic development corporations, and then I'll dig in more specifically into how COSA DC operates. This is going to help orient the new board members, and it will provide a good refresher for those that have been around with us for a little while. So, the most important question is, what is an economic development corporation? So, since the adoption of the Development Corporation Act in 1979, Texas law has allowed cities to form economic development corporations. These are known as EDCs, to attract businesses and create job opportunities. The Act created 2 primary types of economic development corporations, and you'll hear me talk about these a lot. There are Type A corporations, whose primary charge is developing industry, and Type B corporations, whose primary charge is developing communities. The City of San Angelo Development Corporation is a Type B corporation. So this means that we're allowed to undertake any eligible Type A project And we also have an additional set of options that will enhance quality of life, that attracts commerce and attracts tourism to our city. However, the other side of that, with additional options, comes administrative burdens. So Type B corporations are subject to more administrative restrictions than Type A's, and I will cover those restrictions and the different project categories later on in the presentation. So very often, the City of San Angelo Development Corporation is mistaken for the City of San Angelo. However, this corporation is a separate, nonprofit corporate entity with all the powers, privileges, and functions of a nonprofit corporation, except to the extent that any of the rights of a nonprofit would conflict with the Development Corporation Act. And the primary legal authority for economic development corporations derives from chapters 501 through 505 of the Texas Local Government Code. Our development corporation is governed by a 7-member board of directors, subject to the ultimate control of our city council. So we're going to drill down a little bit. We kind of provided a broad overview of economic development corporations, and now we'll focus more on COSA DC. So our mission is very simple. We work with our partners to strengthen our economy and diversify our job base. And a little history for you. In 1991, our Texas legislature expanded, in 1991, the Texas legislature expanded the Development Corporation Act to include community development projects. So that provided for the establishment of Type B corporations like us. In 1999, our voters adopted a half-cent sales tax with a very limited scope, and they set a 6-year timeline on that. In 2004, they reapproved the half-cent sales tax. They expanded the scope of the projects that we could do with that half-cent sales tax money, and they extended the term on the collection of that tax to 20 years. And then again, in 2010, our voters reapproved the half-cent sales tax. They lifted the expiration date for the collection of that tax, so we call that lifting the sunset. But at that time, they actually imposed a distribution, what we call the 72-28 split. 72% of our half-cent sales tax monies go towards ballot initiatives, which Tina will talk about more here in a minute, and the other 28% is what we get to work with for economic development purposes. So what is the role of the board of directors? As I mentioned previously, the Development Corporation is governed by our 7-member board of directors. The board manages all of our corporate affairs, subject to the control of city council and all applicable laws governing nonprofits. First and foremost, this means that our board will evaluate projects and determines what funding, if any, these projects may receive. And staff will often approach the board and seek the board's counsel and guidance on administrative matters as well as they pertain to the function of corporation or any agreements that may come before us. Our corporate officers, so Chapter 501 of the Local Government Code requires us to elect a president, at least one vice president, a secretary, and a treasurer. Per our corporate bylaws, we do this election for our board officers at least once annually and as different vacancies arise. And under our bylaws, our corporate secretary is Ms. Nora Navarez, who is a member of COSA DC staff, and our treasurer is City's Finance Director, Tina Dirschke. So there's a few requirements in statute for board members of an economic development corporation. Under the Texas Local Government Code, Chapter 505, since we are a Type B, all members of our board must reside within the city limits. Under Chapter 502 of the Texas Local Government Code, our board members should complete Open Meetings Act training and Public Information Act training. As y'all saw earlier in the meeting, we are subject to the Open Meeting Act. There are different requirements that we're expected to abide by: 72 hours notice for posting of our agendas, request for public information, accord with the Public Information Act. All of that's really important for board members to understand because some nonprofits are not subject to those guidelines. So that's what makes us unique as a development corporation. We are stewards of taxpayer money. We also, this is an internal requirement, we require our board members to attend an economic development sales tax workshop offered by the Texas Economic Development Council. It's a great class. It provides a good overview of some of what I'm going to go into today. But the best part about it is you get your Open Meetings Act training and your Public Information Act training at that conference. You know, one of the biggest things that often comes up in economic development matters is confidentiality. So EDCs routinely engage in confidential negotiations, and the information that we exchange during these negotiations is highly, highly sensitive. We're stewards of proprietary company information. There's financials, there's trade secrets, there's business plans. We frequently execute non-disclosure agreements to protect this information, and as a board member, you will receive this information, whether that's during closed session or through written or verbal communication. And I cannot stress this enough, that this information is confidential and it should never be disclosed outside of those involved in the economic development decision-making process. There's several reasons to keep these negotiations confidential. First and foremost, the projects are competitive, so we're not the only city competing for this investment, and in the wrong hands, that information could find its way to a competing community. Second, no project is safe until the documents are signed. Until we sign on that line, the project's up in the air. And then most importantly, companies obviously don't want their competition to know their next moves, so we should respect the company's wishes and keep that information private until the company allows its release. So there are some potential ramifications for the unauthorized release of this information. If we release that information prematurely, very obviously they could end negotiations and terminate the project. This would damage our reputation, and it would seriously, seriously impede our ability to go out for projects in the future. And then ultimately, disclosing confidential information without proper authorization could also cause serious legal consequences, both for the corporation or for you personally. I would even go as far as to say that it could cause potential criminal consequences if we disclose information that is offered in executive session. And the mantra that I always say with respect to economic development is that loose lips sink ships. There are communities that are blackballed that just companies won't locate to, and there are certain situations where large multi-million-dollar projects have been terminated because of a breach of confidential information. So please keep that in mind as we move through your service on the board. You know, one of the most common questions that I receive, because I'm, the guy that does the Brett projects, is why do I keep hearing about the same project over and over and over again? And as I mentioned earlier, we're a Type B corporation, so we have some tighter guidelines on the way that we spend those half-cent sales tax dollars. So I want to walk through like a hypothetical project approval process with the board so that you can see how many times you're going to hear about a project. So, if the board determines that, somebody will approach us, they'll ask us for an incentive, we'll begin negotiations with them, and most often this happens through a referral from an outside party, most often the Chamber of Commerce, who does our business attraction and recruitment. So we vetted them. We've determined that they're eligible for an incentive. We'll provide that cursory review at the staff level. We will come to the board and meet with you all in executive session to update you all on the status of the negotiations. If at that time the board says, go for it, let's do this, let's try to negotiate with them, we will begin doing an economic development analysis, and then we will come back at a later board meeting and recommend a project, a proposal, that will happen in a regular session so that the public has the opportunity to weigh in on the project at that time. Say the board approves at that meeting. Let's go ahead, let's do the project, let's offer that economic development incentive. The next step is that we present the board's approval to City Council for ratification. And this next part is where the Type B corporations are different. That's what makes us unique. We have to hold a public hearing before we spend the half-cent sales tax money on a project. We're required to publish notice of the date, the time, the location, and the subject of a public hearing in the newspaper of general circulation. And here that tends to be the Standard Times. So we typically hold our public hearings during a board meeting so that the board's not having to go outside of their normal cadence to hear a public hearing on a project. But also note that if a project is extremely time sensitive, we may call special meetings to conduct public hearings out of cycle. So I always want to be transparent about that with this board. Once we give that public notice in the paper, that is called the right of petition period. It begins a 60-day clock. In that 60 days, if more than 10% of the registered voters in San Angelo submit a petition to our city council saying, we don't want to do this project, or we want you all to hold an election for this project, the city council at their next meeting will call for an election to determine whether or not we can move forward on that project. Now, if the 60-day period expires and there's no petition submitted to council, this board may start the project on the 61st day. And to my recollection, we've never had a petition submitted to council on any project, and Bob would be able to.
Not in the last 12 years anyway.
So we've talked a lot about type A and type B, and I'm not talking about my personality. I'm talking about the different types of economic development projects. So the type A projects are intended to develop industry, and the type B projects are intended to cultivate communities. There's a lot of overlap between the two, so we often refer to them just as type A and type B. So we'll cover type A projects. In 2003, our state legislator amended the definition of authorized projects to require that certain projects create or retain primary jobs. And I will just say, this is part of our vernacular at COSA DC. We use the term primary job regularly when we talk about projects, and I've listed the definition here for primary jobs. You know, it's a long, drawn-out definition, but what it basically means is we are creating jobs that introduce new money into San Angelo's economy. Primary jobs are limited to certain industry sectors by our local government code. So what does this mean for us? As I've said, the key requirement for type A projects are that they introduce new money into our local economy and that they create or retain primary jobs. So a few examples are your manufacturing facilities, your industrial facilities. Some other good examples are aviation facilities, like some of the projects that we've undertaken for CBP-AMO and Skyline, rail port projects like we've undertaken with South Plains Lamesa, and other infrastructure improvements. Type B corporations can undertake any of the previously mentioned Type A projects, so that whole list is available to us. But we can also undertake some additional projects that will enhance our quality of life in San Angelo, because the legislator understands that these types of projects do attract commerce and tourism. So types of Type B projects that are eligible: open space improvements like our monument signage projects, athletic fields like the Texas Bank Sports Complex pictured here, our convention center, we helped when that renovation happened, and affordable housing. We dedicate a significant portion of our funds to affordable housing as part of our ballot issue. So there are also some certain types of projects that have been excluded, that are prohibited from EDC funding by Attorney General opinion and subsequent legislative action. So Attorney General's weighed in and said, no, don't use EDC funding for that, and our legislator has come in and said, yeah, no EDC funding. Those are educational facilities, sewage systems for the general public, residential street construction or repair, or municipal building construction or repair. So I'll give you a few reminders. That's a lot of information to process. It's like, well, what tests should I apply when I'm deciding whether a project should be funded with EDC monies or not? And just remember a couple of simple rules. Our mission is to strengthen the local economy and diversify our job base. So that's number one. Number two, economic development funds are not intended to fund initiatives where other funding sources are more appropriate, whether that's city, county, state, federal, grant funding. Economic development funds, first and foremost, should bring new investment into our community, whether that's by creating primary jobs or incentivizing some type of capital investment. An EDC board may not have the necessary expertise to perform certain economic development activities, So in those cases, they're allowed to contract with other other entities to manage the corporation's activities using the sales tax proceeds. So this provision here, this authorization, is why you all have a staff. You know, we are city employees contracted by the Development Corporation to perform professional and sometimes unprofessional economic development services. So, you know, that's kind of what we do first and foremost. Additionally, we contract with the city for administrative services like legal, finance, human resources, and we also partner with our Chamber of Commerce to do marketing and business attraction. And, you know, one of the cruxes that I always say about economic development is that, you know, 1 + 1 = 3. Our ability to do partnerships is what makes us effective as an organization, and the legislator understands this, appreciates this, and allows us to do so. I will say on the management contracts slide, under no circumstances, and this is vested in state law and in our bylaws, under no circumstances do any of these contracts relieve our board of directors from their discretionary duties and final policy-making authority. And last but not least, EDCs cannot give sales tax proceeds to businesses. They're not handouts. Every economic development agreement that we execute is an economic development performance agreement. So at minimum, the state law requires that it contain what additional payroll they're going to add, you know, what jobs they're going to create, how much are you going to invest, what's your capital investment, and what are the terms to repay the EDC if for some reason you don't perform. And I'll close with this reminder. This board of directors and the 4 COSA-DC staff members here today, we are stewards of taxpayer dollars. And so we structure every agreement, we approach every conversation, every project with that in mind to ensure transparency and ultimately accountability to our public. And I'll turn it over to Tina.
We'll start out by talking about, oops, am I going the wrong? Yeah, that's good. Okay. Talking about Type B sales tax performance. For the month of March, we were up 1.66% compared with the same month last year. Year to date, our collections are over up 4.01% over last year at this time. And we're over budget for revenue by $822,529 year to date. That's due in part to the fact that we budget fairly conservatively because we want to make sure that what we plan to bring in for revenue, that we actually do that. So this chart depicts our Type B sales tax trend. You can see the fluctuations there year over year. Of course, sales tax is a volatile source of revenue, and so again, that's why we try to be pretty conservative when we budget. This is your budget for FY22, which ends September 30 of 2022. We had a revenue budget for sales and use tax of $2.8 million, and then we had other income, which included interest and lease income, of $9,474. For your expenditure budget, O&M represents obligations of the corporation that will be due, and so we budget for those expenditures. I lost my TV. And then future projects represents what's remaining after those obligations are met, and that's what's available in a given year for the board to use at its discretion for the projects that Nolan presented earlier. Oh, pardon me, I should have clarified that this is the budget on the economic development side, which is the 28% that Nolan referenced earlier. And this would be the budget for the ballot side, which is the 72%. Our revenue budget for sales and use tax on that side was $7.3 million. Other there represents interest income. O&M, again, that is the obligations of the corporation. The $5.5 million there that you see is mostly debt service payments for long-term water supply. Projects represent just over $1 million, and that also includes mostly long-term water supply projects, but it also includes the affordable housing program, which I believe is $335,000 a year on an annual basis. And then there again, future projects is just over $800,000, again representing what's left for the board's discretion in any given year. So most of you probably know this, but sales tax allocation is, of course, the total's 8.25%. 6.25% of that goes to the state. 1% goes to the city of San Angelo. 0.5% goes to the Development Corporation, and the remaining 0.5% goes to the Tom Green County. Ballot language. So per the ballot, as Nolan mentioned earlier, funds are split with 28% going to economic development and 72% going to the ballot side. Ballot language kind of limits the way that the monies can be used. And the language is right here, but basically the way we've used the ballot side, the 72%, and interpret it in past years is that it's largely used for long-term water supply projects. Can also be used for conservation programs and things like that that also, promote long-term water supply. On the economic development side, Nolan went in depth into what that may be used for, so I won't belabor that point. But, development, promotion, creation, BREP, those kinds of things. Other ballot projects, these were projects that were specifically listed out on the ballot. Affordable housing, we mentioned, Concho River improvements, auditorium, youth sports facility, Fort Concho Fairgrounds, and airport. Of those, all of those have been completed, except the youth sports facility in Fort Concho, but all of them have been funded to date. And so that money for the youth sports facility in Fort Concho that was dedicated by the ballot has already been moved into a separate fund so that it's no longer an obligation of the corporation. Sales tax collection, just to give you an idea of how we collect it and where we put it, it's a tax as a local option of the state. So the vendors remit their tax to the state. The state then releases that tax to the city, where the Type B portion is then allocated to the Development Corporation. Sales tax is received by the city 2 months after the sales transacted. So in other words, March receipts are reflective of sales made in January. Each month, finance staff splits the revenue that we receive for the 1/2 cent sales tax. 72% goes to the ballot and 28% for economic development. So current financial position on the ballot side, we currently have $726,000 committed for ballot projects, $4.5 million assigned for debt service, and an unassigned fund balance of $2.4 million. And on the economic development side, we have committed for projects of $6.2 million, restricted for fixed assets of $1.7 million, and an unassigned fund balance of $4.1 million. And so that's all of the information I have on your financial picture, but if you would like to have any discussion or have any questions, I'd be happy to answer any questions you have. Yes, sir.
Those committed project numbers, that there's actually money set aside.
Yes, for the committed for ballot projects and the committed for economic development projects. That means we have a line item for each of those projects already in the budget. And so that remaining unassigned fund balance is what's available for other projects should they come up.
I'd just like to make an observation at this point, too, something to point out. In our future projects, the reason, the reason that we have the balance that we do or the funds available is because of the job that the chamber has done in recruitment. 35 recruitments without ever paying an incentive. So that's why the chamber is such a valuable economic development partner, and what Michael Looney and now Michael Berry do and Walt. It's the best money we invest. So I just want to observe that.
What is, being new, what is the $708,744 for the sports and athletic facilities that's already been approved?
Where are you seeing that? And
The voter-approved projects, the sports and athletic facilities? One more, I believe. No, right there. The youth sports facility you mentioned has already been approved and the money set aside?
Yes, sir. Okay.
What was that? What were those funds for?
Per the ballot, it states youth sports facilities. At this time, I believe it's been earmarked for the 29th Street complex. But so far, they haven't begun that project or moved forward with it, but the money is set aside in a city fund for capital projects.
When the 2010 ballot initiative was approved by the voters, these specific projects were approved by the voters at that time, so they get treated a little differently.
I have a quick question. Previously, you mentioned the O&M, and you talked about like some water rights or what other examples are of O&M?
Let me get that for you. Just one second. So on the economic development side, O&M includes administrative costs, the city services agreement, industrial parks operation and maintenance, the marketing for the Chamber of Commerce, advertising costs, utilities, capital, and the business factory operation. And then on the ballot side, I can see if there's anything different there. On the ballot side, that just includes city services, a small portion of that because we don't do as much work on the ballot side. The large part of that is the $5.5 million that goes towards debt service.
Another question, just being new. So obviously coming on now, but as new things come through, do we, as a board, review those, like the city services agreement or other projects, right? We'll get to have a chance to look at those? And
yes, sir.
Okay, great.
Yes, sir.
What is the big utilities figure in that budget? I mean, what utilities are we paying out of our
I would
precincts?
defer to Guy or Nolan on, do you know what's in your, I'm
$314,000. I was just curious.
guessing it's electricity and water and.
On the ballot side,
No, on
I don't
the
think
economic
it'll-
development?
under utilities?
Uh-huh.
Nora will know because she pays.
Well, I was gonna say, I think that line item may include the roof repair, if it's,
Nora, do you know what we use the utilities account for? What bills or what services do we receive?
Yeah, they are the utilities there at the BRC, plus also we're using it for the sign out at the airport, and then also utilities. That's it. Those are the only two locations.
So our utility bills are just that high that they add up
That's
to?
it.
And is the roof included in that? Is the roof repair included in that utilities?
No, the roof is under building and maintenance.
Well, what they were showing, you were out was 314,000, which seems excessive even for our utilities, and so it may include some, or inadvertently include some other item in there, so
Right.
we need to take a look at that. That's a good
Yeah.
question.
very good question.
And then those administrative and city services contracts, when do those come up for review?
The last agreement that we negotiated with the city was last year for a 5-year term. We typically do a review of the admin services agreement during our budget discussion. So if this board has any direction with respect to the admin services agreement that would, result in some type of amendment perhaps, we would have that discussion during our budget discussion.
Yes. And I will say that of that 700,000, about over 400,000 of that is direct salaries and benefits for the 4 employees of the Development Corporation. The remaining 300,000 is the city services side of it, which, as he referenced, pays for things like legal, payroll, HR, finance, city manager's office. We do a plan every year. It's called an indirect cost plan, and it allocates all of those overhead type of expenses out to each of our departments and divisions within the entire city. And that portion, based on drivers such as number of POs created, number of employees for payroll and HR, that kind of thing, they're allocated out proportionately to all of our departments and divisions. And so that amount is what comes out of that plan.
So and I'm sorry, like I said, is this the appropriate time to ask these questions?
Yes.
Okay. So the administrative, that was 192,000, what would that represent if the
Nora.
COSA employees are in city services?
Nora, I'm going to have to lean on you for, what do you think would be included in the administrative services line?
In the administrative services, of course, the admin services contract, the affordable
That's a
housing-
separate line, this.
Let me pull up the payment request.
Okay. She's going to look that
That's
up.
fine.
If you have any other questions, we can come back to.
I have a question just from, I guess, curiosity. do all EDC, type Bs use a service agreement with the cities or counties and other places? I'm just trying to understand.
It varies. So the Development Corporation Act allows cities to contract with any entity that may provide certain services like legal, auditing, finance, and management services even. We have an ordinance that was passed in 2018 that says the Development Corporation shall contract with the city for staff services, which prohibits this corporation from going outside of city for financial, legal, HR services. That's unique. That's not typically the case, but that is the situation here with the Development Corporation. So we are required by city ordinance, not state law, to contract with the city for municipal services.
It's not giving me access, but I know that it's indirect and direct costs. It's on that payment request as well that I remember off the top of my head. And then we also have, in that payment request, I also include the affordable housing, but I know that's a Ballot side as well, so.
We'll get you more breakout on what's in that admin services line. It's a good question.
Thank you.
Okay.
Any other questions for me? All right. Yeah, always feel free to reach out to me if you do have questions later on as you start to absorb and understand how their financial statements work.
Thank you, Tina.
No problem. Okay, so Nolan Sosa again. Our corporate bylaws require that we present an annual report each year to review our corporation's activities. And before we discuss priorities and objectives for the upcoming year, I think it's incumbent on us that I present the annual report to provide the board with some context on where we focused our attention over the last year. City Council identified transportation as a top economic development priority, and they recognize that if San Angelo is going to remain competitive and achieve sustainable economic growth, we've got to invest in developing our city's transportation infrastructure. And their direction was simple. It was 3 words: planes, trains, and automobiles. So with respect to planes, in 2021, we substantially completed the apron paving and storage building installation project, and I'm going to get this wrong, this is a tongue twister, for the United States Customs and Border Protection Air and Marine Operations Center, so CBP AMO. So beforehand, they were operating in these modules that were on temporary foundations, and they didn't have enough ramp space to move those drones around. So we funded a $1.1 million construction project that expanded the paved ramp area. It installed new permanent module foundations, and we installed a new storage building for additional drones. These improvements enabled CBP AMO to expand their mission at Mathis Field. This mission creates high-paying jobs, most of which average over $100,000 a year. So great BRET project. Whether it's a company that's doing a site visit or you're a visitor passing through our airport coming into San Angelo for the first time, first impressions matter. So previously, as you drove out from the airport, you were met with a beautiful wall of dead trees that were undeveloped, unkempt, and an eyesore that really told you, welcome to San Angelo. But our development corporation saw this as an issue. You know, we see the airport as a gateway and a major economic development driver. So during phase 1 of this multi-phase project, we cleared the open space, took away the brush piles. We then moved on to grading the area, seeding the land, and installing some fencing. And in the final phase, we installed a new gateway sign that proudly welcomes visitors into San Angelo. And I'm just going to borrow a little phrase because I think Diane Bays says it so well. It all starts with a visit. It's truly important that we start reframing that airport as one of our first gateways and as a center for economic development and commerce.
Nolan, I might add, just at this point, as a point of reference for the board, is That project actually is on Reclamation Bureau property across the street. We cleared approximately 14 acres in a moon shape. We also were assisted by our operations, lake operations, took over part of that. We have a MOU with the city that actually oversees the contract for that sign. We provided the funds to do that. So the same thing applies with the other monuments that you see downtown on 87, the 200% wool, the sheep and the two, or the ewe and the two sheep there, and then the cowboy pointing the wrong way down Koenigheim. Those are on TxDOT property, but through these agreements, and these are the open space part of that. So that was a little confusing for some of our board before, so I just wanted to clarify that.
So, you know, public investment produced a lot of positive impacts at our airport, but our long-term goal, obviously, is to incentivize private investment into our airport. And in 2021, we took a very important first step in that direction when we entered a public-private partnership with Skyline Aviation to rehabilitate facilities at the airport. So it's going to rehabilitate, reskin the GTE hangar. We're going to construct 2 new parking lots. That's a rental car parking and a general use parking. Commercial apron improvements around that hangar. And we're going to construct a new fixed base operator. We call it an FBO, lounge and office space. And this partnership really underscores our commitment to producing economic growth in collaboration with industry partners. Trains. So before I dig into our discussion about trains, I've got to give a nod to Michael Looney and his effort with the San Angelo Regional Manufacturers Alliance. Back in 2017 and 2018, he engaged in discussions with our local manufacturers and asked them the big question, you know, what keeps you up at night? What are your challenges for your business? And one key concern that they expressed was, well, it's high cost to get materials in and out of San Angelo. It was shipping and freight costs. So, you know, hearing these concerns, both our Development Corporation Board and our City Council realized that we have to make investment in alternative forms of delivery. They saw rail as a potential avenue for this type of investment. We partnered with Roger Horton of Shea Transportation Consulting, who helped determine the next steps to improve San Angelo's rail infrastructure. And during these discussions, we came upon Shad Weisner of South Plains La Mesa Railroad. He operates successful rail ports both in Pueblo, Colorado, and in Slayton, Texas. We purchased a vacant tract of land in 2019. We entered a public-private partnership with SPLRR to develop the land for a multimodal transloading facility. I will say this, over the past year, Shad and his team have developed that rail port at an extraordinary pace. They have cleared brush, they've laid track, and once this project is completed, it will strengthen our local economy by positioning San Angelo as an international shipping point. And I know that Michael will highlight the rail port in his presentation, so I'll just conclude my update by thanking Shad, thanking Roger, and thanking that entire team for their work to develop San Angelo's economy and build a world-class facility right here in San Angelo, Texas. And now automobiles. So you've probably all heard that San Angelo is one of the largest cities in the United States without direct access to an interstate. And decades ago, this board and our city council recognized how critical interstate access was for our long-term sustainable economic growth. So the Development Corporation started advocating for interstate designations. We participated in Ports to Plains, Transportation Advocates of Texas, and the Gulf State Strategic Highway Coalition. And those of you that have served on our board long enough know that we engage with our board members and have them attend these meetings on our behalf. So John, in particular, has really been instrumental in that effort. And very recently, our decades-long efforts paid off when the United States Congress officially designated San Angelo as part of the proposed I-14 corridor, which is better known as the Forts to Ports corridor. It's a 1,300-mile route, which will extend across 5 states, and it will connect several military bases, including Goodfellow Air Force Base. And in the months and years ahead, we're going to be working with our partners through these coalitions to secure funding and start planning. And I have to say for our board, just kind of for the public's information as well, these types of projects involve coordination between Congress, the U.S. Department of Transportation, the legislators of each state that's along that corridor, and their transportation department. So it's red tape on red tape with some additional red tape holding it all together. So it takes a lot of tenacity, it takes a lot of hard work and effort, and we could not do that without the participation of our dedicated board members, and as well as our mayor, who has been a champion for this effort for quite some time. In addition, the I-27 designation. So we participate as a member of Ports to Plains. It's a nonprofit bipartisan group of over 275 communities that span across 9 states. As a result of our continued diligence, our advocacy, the future I-27 designation became official on March 15th, 2022. In fact, as we were preparing for this update, as we were preparing the annual report, it was kind of a up in the air concept, and then on March 15th, we heard the good news that we are part of the designation for I-27. So we expect that both I-14 and I-27 will intersect here in San Angelo, Texas. It will attract new enterprise, create new jobs, and offer additional trade opportunities. And as we know, easier interstate access means additional tourism. So Diane and her group at the Chamber will be hard at work. So I'll talk for a moment about kind of the business retention and expansion program, which really tends to be the core of the economic development activities that we do. That 28% that we talk about lies primarily in this BREP program when we start talking about incentives for businesses. So our incentive program assists businesses that are interested in expanding, whether that's additional capital investment, adding jobs, or some combination of the two. And our incentives, span the gamut, whether that's direct monetary assistance like grants, tax rebates, tax abatements, or other non-monetary assistance like helping with training programs. Our program encourages job creation, obviously, and new business development. And we've helped retain businesses where there may be a risk that they'll relocate somewhere else and cause job loss. The retention aspect is really important because when you attend economic development conferences, one of the things that's really stressed is that 80% of job growth in a local economy doesn't come from new businesses that you're bringing in, but the businesses that are already here. So that retention component, that R in BREP, is a true priority for us, and we have worked and collaborated with businesses that are already here and established to help them stay in San Angelo. Because believe me, just like companies are fielding San Angelo and interviewing us whether we'd be a good site to locate, other companies are looking at San Angelo companies that are successful to try to bring them to their state. So we have to be very aggressive in making sure that we care for the businesses that are here. That is our economy, it's our bread and butter, and it's a priority for us.
I might just add too, in addition to the efforts that we have, we really partner with the Chamber, and they've been very instrumental in the BREP program with SARMA that I'm sure that they will talk about, the San Angelo Regional Manufacturers Alliance. That sort of thing. So as they're out and about and visiting places, they're often a source for those projects and are really great advocates. Again, the added value that the Chamber brings to us, that force multiplier that they add.
Currently, we have 14 active BREP agreements, the smallest being $5,975 and the largest being over $1 million. And this is Bob's baby, our San Angelo Business and Industrial Park. He works really hard on marketing this industrial park. He's worked to develop it. So I wouldn't, talk about the industrial park without kind of giving Bob his kudos. He's our resident engineering, construction management project expert, and we wouldn't be able to do what we do here without Bob's expertise. So the industrial park, what is it? It's a master plan site designed to facilitate business expansion. It's received an AEP designation as a quality site and a designation as a super park from a site selecting consultant. So all of this jargon really means that when site selectors come in to look at San Angelo as a place to locate business. We've already kind of gone through a vetting process, so they know that industrial park's zoned properly. You know, we've gone through the red tape for the business so that when they want to set up shop and put a shovel on the ground, it's ready to go. And that's due in part to a lot of the hard work that Bob has put in on the front end to make that happen. So phase one, as you may recall, we've sold a lot of tracts at our industrial park to companies like Principal LED, Angelo Archives, Frito-Lay, FedEx, and Allen's Transport, among others that I'm probably leaving off here. And while we didn't sell any property in 2021, we have about 17.6 acres available for sale, and there's another 7 or so acres that are under option right now. But looking forward to phase two, we awarded RFB DC 0120 to Reese Albert for phase 2.1 and phase 2.2 of the industrial park construction. I worked with Bob on that during my time in purchasing, so it was a really fun, kind of convoluted effort because there is participation on this project with the Economic Development Administration. Phase 2.1 is funded entirely by the Development Corporation, and phase 2.2 is partially funded by the U.S. Economic Development Administration. So we received what we call an EDA grant for this project. And in January 2022, this board awarded another RFP to clear the brush and start developing that land. Once it is complete, another 118 acres will be available for development, and that excludes streets and drainage. And this is one of my favorite things to talk about: education and workforce development. So when the mics at the chamber are trying to recruit companies, one of the first questions that a site selector is going to ask them is, do you even have the workers with the requisite knowledge and skills to staff our company? And as we all know, the labor market's tightening. Companies across the U.S. are seeing that it's harder to find good talent. So talent is the new currency of economic development. When we're trying to bring companies in, we have to have a workforce that's ready for them to set up shop and open their doors. But where does this talent development start? It starts in our schools, whether that's our grade schools or our local universities. So we've partnered with Ethicon, Principal LED, and of course our Chamber of Commerce to support San Angelo Independent School District's SME Prime initiative, which will develop and deliver manufacturing and engineering education to our high school students. And I'll just give a nod to SAISD for this one, because we are the first district in West Texas and the second statewide to be eligible to have this SME Prime program here in our schools. And one of the things that they have remarked when we've had these SME Prime planning meetings is that they have never seen a community come together in the way that San Angelo came together. They've never seen private enterprise, public institutions pool their funding to kick this project off and make it happen as quickly as it did. Typically, this happens through generosity and fundraising, or the school districts trying to dip into the tranches to make it happen. But we made it happen a lot faster because of the partnerships that we have with our chamber and our industry partners. Ultimately, this is going to provide industry training to help students prepare for technical careers after they graduate. It'll be offered at Lakeview and Central. And ultimately, this reflects our commitment to ensuring that we have a skilled workforce that will benefit our employers and make San Angelo a more competitive place to live and work. So we'll talk a little bit about our business plan competition. The business plan competition is a collaborative effort between the Development Corporation, ASU Small Business Development Center, and the ASU Norris Vincent College of Business. We provide monetary and in-kind prizes to the winners, and we, of course, administer the agreements. Our competition kicked off in 2021. We received 30 entries, 9 made it to phase 2, and 5 advanced to that final judging in phase 3. They presented their business plans to our independent judging panel in November of 2021, and the judges selected Cowboy Up Chocolates as our first prize winner, Lone Star Cheeseburger as our second prize winner, and Medical Arts Pharmacy as our third prize winner. We plan to formally kick off the competition in May of 2022, but just like the industrial park, this effort could not happen if not for the work that Nora does. Nora kind of, aside from running the Development Corporation, she just lets us think that we kind of run the Development Corporation, but it is all Nora. It is the Nora show. the business plan competition runs as smoothly and effectively as it does because of the work that Nora and Dave Erickson and his team put in. And I will say that the SBDC is truly one of our closest partners, and that is not just because they're right across the hall from us. We work with them on a daily basis, and they are incredible partners in this effort, and as well as the College of Business. So we're excited to kick off another year of competition. And the Business Factory. Like I mentioned, this is another joint effort with the SBDC. We manage the building, and we provide any equipment maintenance that's necessary. But ultimately what the incubator is it allows those businesses that are in that really volatile stage. Anybody that's worked in business development kind of hears this: in the first X years, X% of companies will fail. Well, we're trying to make that equation a little bit easier on them, because we are assuming some of the cost of the overhead to allow them to just get into this business factory, focus on running their business. We provide different amenities, so whether that's the copier, the internet, the building itself and the office space, furniture, we bite down on that overhead for them so that they can start getting to work growing their business. The ultimate intent of the incubator is exactly that. They grow their business to a point where they're ready to graduate. Once they graduate at the end of the 4th year or earlier, if that's their preference, they move into their own facility, whether they're going to rent or buy a different facility. And we've been really successful in that initiative. And in 2021, Centurion, who actually occupied the entire upstairs, moved into their facility across from 01 L House at 19 West Beauregard. So that was a really neat kind of progression to see them, kind of moving through and moving into their building. So we're actively marketing our office space now. We have 2 offices occupied, so we're trying to fill those other 5. So we'll be bringing those to the board as we get them. Overall, we had a very, very busy, a very productive year in 2021, but we look forward to 2022, and we're excited for what it will bring. And I'll turn it over to Mike Squared, Mike and Mike from the Chamber of Commerce.
All right, very good. Thank you, Nolan. Okay. Do I need to use the microphone, or do you think you got it?
Yeah, if you want to.
Michael, you can come sit here if you want to.
San Angelo Chamber of Commerce. Thank you. And we've got a quick presentation here just to give you an overview of what was accomplished in the last year. And let's get started. So, Economic Development Department of the Chamber of Commerce is funded by the Cornerstone Foundation, which is a part of our independent funding mechanism at the Chamber, COSA DC, and Tom Green County. What's interesting about the EDD at the Chamber is that we work both with the county and with COSA DC, as there are a lot of projects that we attract to San Angelo that will have some potential overlap. And so that puts us in a unique position. The basic pillars of our program is economic reinforcement, workforce development, legislative policy, and cooperation and innovation with our many economic development partners. The ultimate goal, to deliver access to product, workforce, and efficient time to market. Overview. Of the 5 main pillars, prospect generation is number 1. That is where we are seeking out companies to come to San Angelo or to Tom Green County. Usually it's driven by facility needs. Industry recruitment, which is really the main tenet of why we're here. Rail business recruitment. As Nolan said, the rail port is a major development that was born with the idea in 2018 from many of our members of the San Angelo Regional Manufacturers Alliance who were speaking very positively about getting reliable high, heavy freight service back to San Angelo, which we used to have many years ago. And so that project is, as Nolan said, well underway. There is a total plan of 18,000 feet of track. 11,000 feet of track is on the ground now. That project is going to provide many opportunities for San Angelo's industrial sector because it can reduce freight costs and efficiencies. And that puts us back into a very strong position for national and international freight trade and finished goods trade. SARMA, the San Angelo Regional Manufacturers Alliance, is very instrumental in helping us with our business retention and expansion efforts. Business retention and expansion is known within many economic development circles as economic gardening. And the philosophy is that you have 80% of your positive economic yields come from those companies that are already here in the region because they're familiar with the region, they're familiar with their workforce, there oftentimes is an emotional attachment to the region, and also they already have established a market and trade routes for their products. The BRE efforts, a lot of what we see with our division of the Chamber of Commerce comes from our relationships with over 100 manufacturers, fabricators, and energy service companies in San Angelo. And for those who aren't familiar, the SARMA was started in 2017 under the umbrella of the Chamber, and it serves as the manufacturing association for San Angelo. And when you have those relationships with those types of companies, you learn a lot about your industry and your workforce and barriers to entry and roadblocks to growth. And so by developing those relationships, it's really helped us to stimulate those conversations and action items to get those companies into a larger growth mode, seek out different markets that they can penetrate from San Angelo. And it also helps us to attract new businesses, new industry, mostly with companies that are here bringing in suppliers and companies that they already have established relationships with. And what's really great about that is that when you're dealing with, let's say, a SARMA member here in San Angelo, and they know of a supplier that they would like to have near them, not only are we encouraging recruitment, but they're encouraging recruitment. And we have the added bonus of, one, that company, and there are several examples we have, will come without needing a big incentives package. And incentives are a tool in a lot of EDO's work toolboxes, and that can get very, very expensive. Yes, they're performance-based, but I think more importantly, it's good to have a company that's coming into a market that knows it has a market that they can service, and efficiency is already built in. And the second thing I was going to mention is that when we work with our SARMA members on helping to advise on recruiting these companies, they know those companies and they know of their market health and their financial health. And so that helps us a lot. And then industrial career promotion and training. One of the biggest challenges we have was asked by the mayor at her mayor's forum several days ago, what are the biggest challenges to economic development? And this is not just endemic to San Angelo, it's national, and that is workforce. San Angelo has a little over a 3% unemployment rate right now. That is very, very tight. That is well into pre-COVID levels. And so with a workforce of 58,700 people, you've got a 3% unemployment rate. We don't have a very large surplus of employees. And so industrial career training is a way we can grow our own. Again, coming back to that theme of economic gardening, so important for us to do that. And we have many programs that we have in place with other partners like TMAC, Southwest Research Institute, and SME that we'll talk about. 21 Impact, getting down to the bottom line, 6 closed deals, 129 employer-created full-time jobs, and a value add, a total economic impact of $79 million. How I arrived at that number, we arrive at that number by using a software system that we share with COSA DC that allows us to input the data on the different companies that we've recruited and expanded, and that gives us a number that shows what that economic overall yield is. In this case, each company over a 3-year period. A lot of them use 10-year. We think that's a little quite optimistic, but on a 3-year period, and that includes salaries, capital investment, and the value of the taxation and the yields back to the community from their activities. Prospect generation. This is I don't expect you to read and memorize all of these parts of the pie chart, but prospect generation. We track prospect generation. We use 3 different sources: GSLI, the state of Texas, and a company called Day One Experts. These are companies that we subscribe to. They're subscription-based, and we communicate with them weekly on site selectors that have contacted them, and they have thus reached out to us for information about San Angelo. We currently, at 21 year-end, have 15 actives. We have 9 that are on hold, 18 inactives, and 7 completed. Requests for information, you can see 47, 5 we met criteria. The main hindrances that we have, the challenges, if we're competing with the other cities like, say, Austin or San Antonio or Dallas, are existing buildings, acreage to a degree, because some of these companies need massive amounts of acreage, and employees. Existing buildings and employees are probably the 2 biggest hurdles that we have to leap. So what we do is, when we get these RFIs, requests for information, we'll very quickly, within a few minutes, vet out what their needs are. Anything that looks like we can match it, we go after it. Industry recruitment. Despite the degradation of the global economy by the COVID reaction in 2020 and 2021, which we're still emerging out of, although there's a lot more optimism within industry, we managed to have a pretty good year and a very meaningful basket of recruitment projects for San Angelo. Double J Lamb, that's a meat processor. That land transaction closed in March. Techmetric, which is a software company with headquarters in Houston, but they have a relationship in San Angelo with several employers or employees. We were very successful in helping them to find a location in San Angelo. What's nice about that is that it brings another type of industrial sector, the software as service sector, into San Angelo, which is part of our strategic objective, and that is to grow more businesses like that. Tricor Steel, a great little manufacturing company that has an awesome market. They make steel impact reduction barriers for the Department of Transportation nationally. And then the big one that we've been working on for 3.5 years, Korea Midland Power Company. This is a $164 million solar power plant on Ratliff Road, so just outside the city limits on the southern side of town. That doesn't necessarily translate into jobs because it takes 2 people to run that facility. But what's nice about it is that when you're in an environment with 3% unemployment, large capital investments make a big difference. And it's going to produce about $2.4 million in direct economic impact. That number actually is the tax yield to Tom Green County over a 10-year period. Going on to rail business recruitment, the rail port has become one of our jewels in the crown of our home of San Angelo, Texas. And there's a lot to tell about it, in that, yes, the SARMA members came to us in 2018 telling us that we need to create efficiencies by building some kind of rail service. It started off as a discussion about maybe a railroad siding off of Old Ballinger Highway. What is known in the industry as a team track might be built by Texas Pacifico or a private investor so that trains could be built and transloaded. It got more ambitious as time went by. Our relationship with COSA DC took that to a whole new level when COSA DC, in partnership with the Chamber, secured and identified and secured the 183 acres of land that is bordered on the north by FM 2105 and 50th Street on the south. Once we began moving towards that, we were engaged by Roger Horton, who's become a very trusted friend of ours and a former BNSF and Indiana Harbor Belt rail expert. He was in 43 years in the business. and then connected us up with South Plains Lamesa Railroad. Through good fortune and a lot of hard work, a lot of visits, we were able to secure South Plains Lamesa agreeing to not only build, fund, and operate our railport. The option, too, would have been to go with a company that builds railports for communities professionally, and that's a difficult option because they're going to rely on 1 to 3 specific commodities, and that railport for the community may not be really a community railport. It actually might be their railport for those commodities and those customers they're servicing so that they can afford to build it and operate it. In this case, it's different. It's a very democratically run, multimodal, multi-commodity railport. So companies that are here, a lot of ag companies, steel companies, chemical companies, aggregate companies, have the ability to do 2 cars, 4 cars, or 100 cars, depending on when they need it seasonally. What's interesting about this is that the rail line that runs from Presidio, Texas to Coleman, Texas, the old South Orient line, many years ago, probably 25 years ago, was slated to be scrapped as a defunct line that had no utility. That line was saved in part by the efforts of Representative Drew Darby and Rob Janelle. That rail line has been leased or was leased to Texas Pacifico. It is the actual line is owned by TxDOT. And that rail line has received over $116 million in renovations over the past 3 years by Texas Pacifico. Texas Pacifico is a gem of a company, and we are grateful that they are headquartered right here in San Angelo, Texas. They are part of the same ownership group of the Ferromex rail line. Ferromex is the largest Class 1 rail line in Mexico. It's a massive rail system. It's just like our BNSF system here in the United States. So Texas Pacifico and Ferromex are effectively the same company. That line has been rehabilitated in large part, is close to being finished, and Texas Pacifico will be our Class 3 short line haul between Coleman and Presidio, Ojinaga. Of note, on the picture there, you see the bridge with the span across the top of it. That is the actual Ojinaga Presidio bridge. That was taken by Guy Andrews and me in August.
Taken by Michael Looney because he's illegally over in Mexico.
Well, you'll notice that we're on the white side of the bridge, and our custodians who are with the city of Presidio actually gently flagged us back, and they said, "Come on back, guys. You're actually in Mexico." We said, "No, the river's over there." He said, "Don't worry about the river. That's the line." So that bridge was completed 2 years ago, and it's ready to roll, ready to go. The only thing holding up, which is being worked on and should be freed up probably by, we think, summer, fall, soon, is Customs and Border Protection standing up their inspection stations. A new inspection station for them, for the railport, for the rail line at Presidio. Once that happens, we then have a direct connect to 4 major seaports on the western coast of Mexico that are looking for ways to route their freight cargo. Instead of through El Paso or Eagle Pass, they want to come through Presidio onto San Angelo. So this put us in a position to where we now are going to be experiencing freight traffic coming and going between Mexico and the United States to put a logistics center there at the rail port, and that's the objective.
What's the time frame for that?
We expect that the bridge, we're told, the goalposts keep getting moved a little bit further, but we have knowledge by Texas Pacifico that it's being worked at the highest levels. We feel very confident that it probably be, I'm going to say summer, early fall. We can't be held to that, but working with TxDOT on that. Actually, I should say Federal Highway Administration funded half of the permanent CBP facility, and TxDOT funded the other half, and that was secured in October of last year. So we're getting close, and once that happens, it is going to provide a whole lot more opportunity, not just for our industrial sector, but also for our agricultural sector. BRE, economic gardening, continuing on. we wanted to highlight SMC Global. We recruited them in 2018. They were coming into land at a facility in Midland. They're a New York-based chemical company. We got wind that they were in the area and invited them to come down to San Angelo. They did, and you know, it's the industrial employee revenue-generating gift that keeps on giving. They're now on their 4th expansion. That is an image of their Dan Hanks facility. They purchased that from Patterson UPI last year, and when we ran the economic yield on that expansion, $22 million over a 3-year period. And then Motor Windmill, what a neat little company, a champion company. They recently acquired their biggest competitor. We actually had a grand opening ribbon cutting at their facility yesterday, and we worked very closely with them on their facility expansion, which gives them a new ability to better send out their equipment for sale once it's been packaged and released out to the different parts of the country that it goes to. So that's a real stand-up little company, and we're really proud to have them here. Again, a $6.8 million direct economic impact over 3 years. And then industrial career promotion and training. This is something that I want to salute my new partner that I hired in October, Mr. Mike Berry. Mike was, for those who don't know him, he's sitting right there. And yes, we do color coordinate our shirts and our jackets on a daily basis, and we've been known as the Mikes. And so Mike is a Air Force Academy graduate. He served with distinction at the United States Air Force for 12 years. Moved to San Angelo because his family wanted to live in San Angelo. And that's the classic story we hear time and time again. Why are you here? It's because I want to be here. I like the lifestyle. It's not a small, teeny town. It's not a big city. It's right, that sweet spot right in the middle. Homesteads out in Wall. I permanently borrowed him from Ethicon, where he was for 10 years. And he was actually on our board. And as an Ethicon leader, he was an instrumental charter member of the SARMA. So he helped me and for our other partners create the Manufacturers Association. And again, even in that capacity when he was still at Ethicon, we knew that we had an issue that had to be addressed as aggressively as possible, and that is how do we inspire, educate, and train students who are here to find the skills they need to stay in San Angelo. One of those tools is the SME Prime program. SME is Society of Manufacturing Engineers. It is a massive organization, national organization that virtually any civil and mechanical engineer is a member of, although they do allow affiliate members like me to join, and Mike. The beauty of this is their SME Prime program, which is designed to train, inspire students at the high school level. And as Nolan said, SAISD is only the second high school in Texas to have that program in place. And we were in competition with 2 other cities. We beat them. We're proud of that. The only other city that has a program, SME Prime, is Hollenstein Technical High School in Fort Worth. What was nice about this program is that the seed money was needed. So Society of Manufacturing Engineers Education Foundation needed seed money, and that was contributed by COSA DC, by you, Ethicon, Principal LED, and then the Chamber made a contribution as well. That supercharged this project to where at this point now, where we are, they are right now working on curriculum, and they have done their first Snap-on Precision Measurement Instrumentation Tool Kit. That's the equipment that they've procured. The curriculum's being delivered and developed right now. And then in the next year, it's going to grow even more. And it will continue to grow as the next couple of years progress. There is a video that I'm going to keep us going here. I'm not going to play it, but I think you all get the idea on the strength of the SME Prime program, the concern that COSA DC, our local employers, and the Chamber have for, again, economic gardening, growing our own. And I'm ready to take any questions you may have, and really want to thank you all so much for allowing the Chamber to be a partner, to work for you, to work with you. It is a force in the Concho Valley. We get comments off all the time. How come the county, the Chamber, the city's development corporation, the city staff, everyone works so well together? And the customer sees that. Smc Global sees that. Other customers see that. And so that gives us that validation that we're doing the right thing and we're keeping our hearts and our minds in the right place. Any questions?
So you're actively recruiting. Do you guys purchase leads, or how do you get that process done?
We do. We have GSLI and Day One Experts are companies that have existed for years that collate leads, and they'll put baskets of them out into the economic development community every day. We see them every day. We'll see 4, 5 a week, sometimes more. A variety of different types of companies. Some of them are the big mega deals, needing 200 acres. They're going to build seven buildings, 1 million square feet each, 3,000 employees. We focus in on the ones that we know that we have a chance at capturing. And yes, we do. Now, the states, our FI system, which oftentimes captures some of those that we get through our private lead source, we see those as well. And the state of Texas, the governor's office, has an economic development office that disseminates those as well. And we have every week we're on the phone with them, talking to them, getting more intel. Should we go for it? What are the details? And they're extremely helpful. A lot of those really are those leads we get, though. It's worth mentioning. They're not just looking at Texas or West Texas. Some of them are. And of course, when we see West Texas, we jump all over it. But a lot of them are looking on national searches. So they may have 5, 6 states that they're looking at. So that widens the field. And just the simple reality is that when you have a facility, let's say in Phoenix, we worked with a company there, and they put out an RFI, and we were told by the company, compete, but there's a good chance we're staying here. And that's a very honest answer, and we get it. So there's quite a bit of shopping that's going around too. So we have to vet those out. But yeah, growing our own is really probably the bulwark, the main pillar of the economic yields that we've had, and just keeping those relationships alive with those companies. That's why Guy mentioned that we've recruited many companies without needing incentives, and we find that's because of our ability to deliver services. Air Motor was a prime example. There are many companies that could be delivered incentives packages. But most of the companies we deal with say, look, give it to someone who needs it. We don't need it. We're okay. It's not why we're in business. Sometimes it's helpful. But I think when economic development becomes incentive-based, there's a certain purity that's lost. We don't want to get into the business. When I was in the commercial real estate business in Austin for years, and you don't want to get into that mode of buying the deal. So I didn't mean to over-answer your question, but since we don't have much time together as a group, I wanted to speak to that.
Michael, I think it's an important point with regard to buying leads. Y'all have brought in a number of companies that you nurtured from the get-go without having purchased that lead. And I applaud you for that.
Well, thank you. Anything else? All right, very good.
So we walked through a lot of information. You've heard from our treasurer about our financial position. You heard from me about what the role of the EDC is and what we've been working on in 2021. And of course, you heard from Mike Looney at the Chamber on what they're doing to recruit businesses and how that effort is going. And so at this time, rather than present, I'm going to just kind of help facilitate a discussion of what we should be working on in 2022 and 2023. As I mentioned, this board governs the corporation, and so as staff, we lean on you all for guidance on what initiatives you'd like to see us pursue. If you think what we've worked on in 2021 has merit and would like to continue some of those initiatives, we can do that. Or if there's new initiatives that you all want to bring to the table, now is the time really for us to lay out what our primary goals are. And just as kind of a precursor, I think it's good to work, the rule of 3, because I think anything more than that and we start to get spread too thin, we are a staff of 4. So I say if we can focus that down to 3 major objectives for the upcoming year, that'll be really productive. And I'll open it up to any board member.
Were you going to give, maybe I misunderstood you, the initiatives from before, or?
So it's interesting, beforehand, when I started walking through this presentation, one of the biggest things is, we kind of operated on a mission statement basis. Does it align with the mission statement? And let's just work with that. So you guys kind of have carte blanche to define 3 initiatives, because we have worked on planes, trains, and automobiles, but that really could be summarized as transportation infrastructure. I don't think that in and of itself really defines the 3 priorities for COSA DC. That may just be 1 priority. So I think we need to broaden our perspective and set some more strategic growth goals for the corporation as we move forward into the next year.
Examples of some of the things that we see, and you can tell us yes or no. Broadband also falls into that, and there are some initiatives, pardon me, as far as broadband going on. We have actually 3 or 4 companies that are working on providing fiber optics. Vexus is a company that's moving in, and they're kind of targeting the main provider here in town. Frontier is providing fiber. Suddenlink has just announced that they're going to build a fiber network here. And then sort of on the business side is Conterra Networks. But there are also other initiatives going that we'll participate in with ASU in terms of cybersecurity that all kind of ties into that. There's also effort to kind of identify, we kind of stumbled into this in a conversation. We were a bit concerned that Time Clock Plus was losing employees, and so we met with their CEO and really discovered that they weren't losing them as such. These guys were going to work for Fortune 500 companies, remaining in San Angelo, but at much higher salaries. So, some of these guys are making $400,000, and they're able to do that. So, in addition to recruiting companies, recruiting, once we get that broadband in, recruiting high-tech individuals that would prefer the lifestyle and the cost of living, quality of life here, as opposed to living in Austin or San Antonio or the metro areas. We want to try to help identify some of that as well. So that will take up some of our efforts. If y'all are in agreement with that type of effort. But there may be other things, Chris.
Yeah, I would agree. We were talking about that earlier, but this work from home movement is definitely taking off, which is also creating a shortage in housing in the San Angelo market. And when we talk about being able to provide employees when there's not housing for them to obtain here locally to move, it's going to be hard to attract new businesses. So I think housing needs to be one of our top priorities.
We agree.
And that's, the housing study that was conducted in 2019 has kind of kicked things off, but right now, the two Michael and Mike are looking at periodically, and I believe they've already had conversations with a consultant that did that study to maybe even update that on an annual basis so we can stay up with that. You know, we've met some of the Air Force's housing needs. They tried to address it for 10 years, and you know, what we found out is they want multifamily housing. They want their airmen to be in safe neighborhoods and, you know, close together for the support aspect of it and that sort of thing. So we will continue with that. Another thing they'll be requesting us to look at, and I would suggest that we take a hard look at it this time, is another Air Force DAG grant, and it's going to be geared towards their own base housing. They got some really old stuff that needs some improvement on that. We've participated in one now that's kind of centered on resiliency. They redid the Crestman dining facility out there, 5G. They're building a facility to train canines at the air base. And of course, most of you realize that it's really a joint base now for training. They train all branches of service, including the new Space Force at Goodfellow. So I think it's important that we continue to partner with that where we have available funds. Typically, they will come in and ask us for like $400,000 or $500,000, primarily to help administer those programs through there. But the grants themselves are in the tens of millions of dollars, and we participated in 3 so far. I think it may be time to look at another one. Very heavily involved.
I think one of the things too that has been touched on, kind of, you know, ancillary to all these different discussions, is workforce development. So, you know, these are one of the things that economic development corporations have a hard time tackling, because workforce development is a community effort. So it's not something that we can just handle here. Mm-hmm. It's something that's going to require significant partnership. You know, luckily we have great relationships with ASU, the SBDC, our school districts, our universities, and of course the chamber. And so I think, you know, in conversation with our mayor during the economic development roundtables, this is one of the things that she is really advocating for, is that we look at, you know, developing our workforce through these types of initiatives like SME Prime. You know, we've been in conversation with Yolanda at the Workforce Development Board, their executive director, and she's really been aggressive in going out and seeking these, you know, high-demand job training grants, and she's been partnering with Howard and Angelo State to make this a reality. But I think, you know, that's something that this board might talk about to determine whether they want us to start engaging with these educational institutions and our other community partners to make it happen. And I will even go further to say, one of the things that we hear from just individuals and from employers is that we educate. We have great universities here that provide top-tier education, but because these students are so competitive, they're recruited from, you know, outside cities and outside communities. So part of what I think, you know, this Economic Development Corporation could do in that effort is helping be somebody that connects the dots, that brings these students through an educational or a training program, through an institution of learning, whether that's SAISD or Angelo State or Howard, and we connect them with local employers, whether that be through internship programs or vocational training, so that way they have an opportunity to make that connection. They have a gateway into employment here in San Angelo, and they see that avenue, so that, you know, we can selfishly keep these employees, these skilled workers here, and help address that workforce issue that keeps coming up. So I offer that for the board for their consideration. I think that may be something that we think about as a priority.
I would certainly like to see that as a very important step forward, and would like to see it as one of the 3. Along the way, with the approval of both I-14 and I-27, as a step beyond just the improvement of the transportation, the routes for those 2 highways will come together basically on near the airport, the Wall area. From there, as they move north and west, the 2 interstates will be on a single roadbed, combined route, between here and Sterling City, where the split into separate entities or separate pathways happens again. I personally see that development along that route will precipitate expansion of our city limits, which would further increase the territory over which Costa DC could have positive influence. I don't know that it needs at this early time to be one of the 3 priorities, but I believe we need to have it on the radar that there will be companies who want the benefit of double interstate traffic on one band of concrete. And not just the retail side, not just the Cracker Barrels and others who are outside our NAICS codes, but the manufacturers who would benefit from being at this junction of 2 interstates. Back with the Ports to Plains effort, when we went to Washington, visited with Senator Cruz in particular, at the end of our talking point presentation to him, he simply said, okay, now tell me what's not on your talking papers. And many of you have heard this from me before, but for the benefit of those who are new, if you were to look at a satellite view of the United States, photograph taken at night, you'll see the history of the United States unfolded there. The bright illumination is on the East Coast. It gradually gets dimmer until the Mississippi River, and then it's tremendously bright again. Because in the 17 and 1800s, that was the major north-south thoroughfare. Businesses, industry, and communities built there. There was a tremendous jump to the West Coast with the gold rush. So you have another bright spot out west. You've got a bright spot in the Rockies that actually happened after World War II, when so many of the troops that were trained to fight in the snow in Europe came back and created resorts. They had ski training. They created ski lodges. That's where the terrain was. But again, if you look at that lighting, we get to the I-35 corridor and it is tremendously bright. I-35 is not only built, populated, it's saturated. And what I explained to Senator Cruz was, if you take that next slice of north-south route being I-27 Ports to Plains, that will be the next industrial slice of the westward expansion of the United States. We add the benefit of I-14 and the fact that in our neighborhood, I-14 and I-27 are going to share a pathway. I'd like to know what the city plans are. What's the vision for annexing, developing, long-range planning? What's going to be the water treatment, all the infrastructure that will have to go in order to support the growth, and what part of it do we want to be part of San Angelo, rather than, and I'm not saying we compete with the county, but many of these businesses will locate where they have city fire protection, of which we have, as a city, an excellent rating. So they will probably be coming to us saying, please annex my property that I just bought. But what is our vision for that? I don't really know where that all fits with what we could do as a board and as an economic development expenditure. But I think we need to spend just a little bit of time on that vision.
It's interesting you should say that, John, because yesterday we all met with the MPO, with Major Hoffines, and to talk about those types of things and to gain our input. They work constantly with city planning and development services and with our operations and talk about those issues. We were giving our input into where development is going to take place and what we envision to happen as well. So it becomes sort of a natural extension. And I'm sure they've talked with the chamber and about, what they envision because, they're so involved in the county side of it with all the solar that's coming into here and other industries. And typically, when we do have large tracts of industries, if we're not planning ahead, those are going to be in the county because that's where the land is available. So that all kind of gets looked at as a part of it. But just to let you know, we're in that mix and involved in envisioning for the future.
Wonderful. Thank you.
The other thing, too, I think we have some concentration on, and we've been involved a little bit, is still in its infancy, is the aviation program. And then what else besides that? So really kind of the Skyline project and the expansion of the hangar and all it ties into that. And the same people are heavily involved, and they're looking at potentially putting training, the flight simulators, partnering with us in the EOC to have that in expansion. But once that runway's closed out there, we will be developing and already have a plan for development outside the fence at the airport. There's also a lot of activity happening in the airport of private companies building hangars. It's going to be some pretty good expansion, moving that fence line back on the south flight line down there and just projects that are coming up. So airport is a real focus for us, and it's to really help the airport grow. We're providing incentives in this public-private partnership, but our focus is helping the airport get their lease rate so they have money for operations so they can expand that operations. Long-term goal, and maybe not in my lifetime, but could even be to move the terminal to the other side and bring in the traffic from another way. Those all tie together. We have to partner because of the sewage issues and all the rest of that, but we're all heavily engaged in looking at all of those aspects and bringing them together. So we devote time to those processes as well, just to let you know. But
Having spent that short time when I was off the Coast of D.C. board, part of it was with the airport board, and I am just so excited about what we can do out there.
One of the objectives in doing, as we call it, a first-class FBO, in addition to that hangar, is that the idea is to attract more jet traffic. It's the pilots who decide where they're going to stop to refuel. Corporate jets flying from coast to coast from here. They stop in Austin or they stop in San Antonio. They get a half hour, 45 minutes, an hour of ground time, taxiing, finding a gate, trying to get. They can be in and out of here in a matter of a few minutes if they want to be. So to put a first class FBO with a pilot's lounge and everything here, it's going to attract more of those aircraft to come here for their stop. And as they do that, they're going to have an opportunity to look around and say, wait a minute, hey, this place is kind of interesting. There's a first class FBO. We got good access to, anywhere in the country from here. That's going to spur a certain amount of growth outside of even the airport. You stop and think, who has corporate jets? Every major company in the world has a corporate jet of some kind. And so attracting those is going to be another sort of, as Diane says, they got to come here before we can get them. So that's another attraction that is going to come as a result of that project.
I'll make another comment, and again, I don't know that we have to lead the charge, but I feel like as our board, you know, if you go back to our financials earlier, we get our revenues from half-cent sales tax. And so I think we always have to be thinking about what drives those half-cent sales tax here locally. And I think about our stock show and rodeo. I think about Lake Nasworthy, and I think about Bell Street Sports Complex. And again, we have a top 5 rodeo in the country. And again, we need to maintain that to always be a top 5 rodeo. And so our support of there, you can go back and look at sales tax receipts and see that spike when the rodeo's in town. You go and you look in the summer months and you know the traffic that we're getting at Lake Nasworthy. And I know that, you know, the city's working on the infrastructure there with the sewer, but we need to be a part of that and help where we can get Nasworthy developed and drive more traffic here, and get the half-cent sales tax on the motel as people come and use our recreational lake. And then finally, again, at Bell Street, you know, we are in West Texas. We're subject to rain and no rain if you've been around here the last 90 days. But a lot of these West Texas facilities are going to all AstroTurf. And again, have we done an analysis to see, is it cheaper to turf the fields than it would be to maintain water in the fielding and attracting bigger and better events there that are going to stay in our hotels, that are going to eat in our restaurants and drive up the sales tax dollars, which allows us as an organization to provide more funds to drive economic growth. So I think those are 3 big areas that we're fortunate to have in San Angelo. And as this board, I think we've got to help support those 3 areas and continue to drive that growth here.
So just to summarize, and you read my mind, because so we talked about workforce development, housing, which is great, and quality of life is what I was going to call it, because that's exactly right. What drives more of those tax base here, shopping local, anything that supports those initiatives and generates more funds to let us do more work. I think those 3 are very good. I don't want to cut out transportation, but that's sort of kind of inherent with the things that are happening. But in terms of initiatives, I think, yeah, quality of life, workforce development, and housing would be at least what we seem to summarize right now.
I agree. I agree. And definitely being in the real estate industry, we'd have to agree on housing as well. That is a challenge nationwide, but especially here, we're really tight on inventory. What I was thinking as Chris was speaking just now about the hotels and everything else, you know, I'm involved in a lot of different organizations and so forth, and you know, one comment that I've heard from several people over the years is the lack of really like a kind of a convention center, or if we wanted to hold like a conference, you know, like national, like Texas Board of Realtors, you know, they do a conference every fall, and it's all over. It's been in Houston, Galveston, San Antonio, Austin, Dallas. It'd be awesome to bring it over here, but we don't have the capacity to host, you know, 1,500 realtors or so. So I think that'd be an opportunity there, along with you know, housing. I throw kind of lodging in there. Obviously we've seen a growth in hotels and so forth, but if we wanted to have a convention or a conference, we really don't have a facility to do that. So that's something to keep on the radar as we're expanding and these interstates converge. Again, just to draw people here the first time, right, and then hopefully bring them back, which is how a lot of us get here in the first place, right? So.
Well, what we've heard so far is that we have workforce development, housing, and quality of life. And of course, we'll maintain our council-directed charges of planes, trains, and automobiles with our ongoing projects. And then, of course, we have our, you know, competition, business incubator, our different initiatives that we have that we just do routinely. So it looks like that's shaping up for a busy 2022. But before we officially set these as our objectives, I just want to kind of open it up one more time. If anybody wants to throw something else out there, or if somebody just wants to say these are going to be the 3 objectives.
I just want to say that I think with the 3 objectives, they coincide with the activities that you're currently doing, which is, I think, important. We don't want to be like, okay, you've been doing this for 5 years and let's go this direction, you know? So I think they're more themes, right? Kind of like a mission versus specific activities.
Right.
I just wanted to make that clear.
Yeah, because I would almost categorize workforce development, broadband, even, education, all kind of under one category, right? Because we need to educate our workforce, we need the resources, the broadband, whether for them, for school or for business. So all of that, I think, is integrated as one. I see infrastructure, planes, trains, and automobiles almost as a second, or, not in that particular order, but as a second separate, circle, if you will. And then the housing, hotel, lodging, people need a roof over their heads. So I think I would categorize those or summarize those under those three main topics, and then, in my opinion, to organize them.
And yeah, and everything, I was just thinking, it all helps with retention and recruitment and all that. But I would just pose one question to all of you. Do you guys have anything that you need or feel like, hey, if we had this type of thing, that would be the only other thing I would pose?
Over the last year, one of the things that we've discussed internally, the issue that we run up against from an operational standpoint, and this gets really kind of into the weeds, but I'll be candid, we have to compete with, your Lubbocks and your Abilenes. If we're looking in that direction, these are the cities that we look as kind of the exemplars of how economic development should be done. Misty and her group in Abilene, John and his group in Lubbock are phenomenal leaders at a state and national level in economic development. So we look to them for kind of guidance and examples of how we should be doing business. And one of the things that we kind of look at is, number one, we want to talk about Costa DC being a half-cent sales tax organization, but I frequently joke that with respect to economic development, we're an 8-cent sales tax organization. We work with 28% of what we've got. So that's something that needs to remain, a conversation is if that's still working for us. And that's for the board, for the council, and for the voters to really mull around. One of the other things that tends to be kind of, you brought it up, operationally, we are an entity that works with government and works with our community partners, but we also have to be responsive and move at the speed of business, which can sometimes be difficult if we have a ton of administrative burdens that weigh us down. You know this because you work with a public entity. This can be cumbersome. And time in economic development projects is a lot of money. And so we've had conversations about revisions to the bylaws. These haven't been revisited since 2010, 2011. But, it may be incumbent on our president and our board to form a committee where we kind of look through our bylaws, look through the way that we operate as a corporation, and ask ourselves, is what we were doing in 2010 when this ballot issue was passed and we wrote those bylaws and amended them, is that still working for us now in 2022? Technology has changed. Business has changed. We have to be a lot more aggressive. We have to be more with the times. And that's going to involve a lot of serious discussions about the way that we do business so that we can move more quickly and efficiently as an organization. I think that's paramount.
Yeah, that's key because you hit the nail on the head. Speed of doing business. That's something I've been in multiple communities around Texas. And under I think today's example of our earlier, situation shows the difficulties of working through a bureaucracy of a city or a university. I know it from both sides. So I would really stress that we need to revisit that if we're going to get to where we want to be as a community.
And of course, the board president always reserves the right in our bylaws to form a committee. He can appoint board members, staff members to serve on that committee to explore a specific issue like this, because that will take a lot of committee work. We will need to flesh out feasibility. We'll consult legal, our city partners, chamber partners, everybody that has a stake in that type of decision would need to come to the table and present their viewpoint, because that will, it could really change the way that we operate, and hopefully for the better.
Well, it's just standard, it's best practices, right? I mean, you mentioned two other communities. On the consulting side, when I was there before, that's what we did, right? You go and see, okay, who do you compare yourselves to? And right now, at least from the reports, when was the last time we had a best practices kind of review? Are we doing a good job? I mean, we're doing a great job. I do believe that everybody's doing great, but Is there something that's hindering us? That's how I look at it from the outside.
You know, TEDC, which is kind of the Economic Development Council and is the professional organization for economic development in Texas, they're pretty particular about the way that you approach these issues. And they have an Economic Excellence Award that, you know, we definitely want to start looking at as we move forward. But one of the things that they kind of talk about is how often are you doing studies? How often are you doing plans? How often are you visiting your strategic objectives, which really gave rise to this, well, we need to get input from our board and set strategies and priorities. But if we're going to be having these types of conversations, it's worthy of a conversation that we might consider developing an economic development strategic plan that at least, you know, we've talked about what are our priorities for the next year, but any corporation, any organization needs long-term, 5-year and 10-year plans. And so again, I would strongly recommend that we do something like that.
Agreed.
For alignment, you know, we've had a pretty significant board turnover. You know, we're looking at our board, and a year ago today, our board was substantially different. So priorities change, objectives change, but I think the mission stays the same.
Yeah, I think so. We have an opportunity, you know, coming out of COVID. I tell people all the time, I mean, I've been here 2 years. Our experience in San Angelo with COVID is going to be totally different than everybody else's. You know, the people down south, the university I graduated from, still is going hybrid, and you're just, you know, they're not living their life right. So we have that up. We're already ahead of the game. What we want to be able to do is move quickly and not be staggered. So I think I would ask the president, maybe we establish a committee and to look at that, you know. I want to be leaner and meaner, I guess. I don't know. I don't know if we can do that. That's yeah.
You can. So formation of committees is contemplated in the bylaws, so that's something that can happen at the direction of the president at any time. Other than that, there's no really formal action that needs to be taken with respect to adopting priorities. We have had great input. You know, this meeting is recorded, so we can always kind of go back and reference, you know, what did the board say, or who brought that up, or, oh, that was a great point. So we appreciate that input, and I think we have a pretty good idea of how we're going to move forward. And like I said, 2022, if 2021 wasn't already busy enough, I think the next year is going to be even busier as we move into fleshing out some of these projects that we're working on. So with that, I think we're ready to move to the next item.
Well, I guess that's adjournment.
Which is everyone's favorite item.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll entertain a motion for adjournment from the board.
So moved.
Second.
All right. We got a first and a second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All right. Thank you, everybody. 12:14. Thank you, everybody.